Chapter 121. Whoops. So caught up in the strange energy of the moment, it takes a moment before I even realize what it is I've done. Ah. Whoops. I mean, he hit me on the head with his stupid mace. What exactly did he think was going to happen? I've been living a violent life in the dungeon. Some things are just becoming instinct, you know. If you whack me on the head with your stupid mace, then you can't really blame me for retaliating, right? It's self-defense. The priest seems to also take a moment to process these events. He looks down at his now severed limb before a new expression gradually takes over his face. He falls backwards, clutching at his arm, and screams loudly in horror. This triggers the stunned crowd, who had been locked in place with shock, to erupt with fear, people climbing over each other as they attempt to run for the door. Oh boy. This is not what I intended. Why the hell did we have to dig up into a freaking human building anyway? Did they think the dungeon had delivered some free XP to them as offering or something? You expected me to just stand there and get killed. Even if I were to let you bash my head in with that ornate mace for half an hour, it wouldn't have been able to damage my diamond carapace in the first place. All I'd get is a headache. Since it has come to this, I have to try and limit the damage. My plan was to have the colony hide somewhere on the surface so we could ride out the worst of the wave in relative safety. If we manage to draw a human army down on our heads, then we may as well go back down into the dungeon and try our luck. If these humans run away and bring back soldiers, we'll be in a real pickle. Think, Anthony. You have to fix this. Out of desperation, I do the only thing I can think of to stop the people from running away. I channel my gravitational magic and form the gravity domain. I mean, it would stop them moving, right? With my increasing skill and familiarity with the spell, I can form it much more quickly than before. In only a matter of seconds, the powerful energy erupts from me, encompassing the church building. Thankfully, I had enough presence of mind to dial back the strength of the gravity. The moment the spell erupts, the humans find themselves unable to keep their feet. The younger children immediately fall to the floor, completely unable to resist the force pulling them down. The adults are better able to cope, but even they find themselves without the capacity to walk. The priest himself is too busy shrieking and gripping his arm, holding it before his disbelieving face. He doesn't even seem to notice that he has been forced onto the floor by my spell. In some ways, I'm impressed. I only leave the domain in place for a few seconds before I shut it off. In those few seconds, the frantic escape of the congregation has been halted. Almost everyone has been forced to the floor, unmoving. I try my best to stare them down a little. It isn't easy to communicate "don't move or I'll turn it back on again" with an ant stare, but I do my best. They seem to get it to some extent. Fear twists their faces as they have now realized that this isn't some religious experience but the enemy of their kind, monsters from the dungeon, emerging when they least expected it and possibly the last place they expect it. Seeing the terror and tears on the faces of the children is quite a blow to me. It wasn't that long ago I was a human myself. I'm not that scary, am I? I mean, a giant ant that can apparently control the force of gravity would be pretty damn scary when I think about it. With the crowd subdued for the moment, I decide to try and work out exactly where we are. I need to know a little more about this situation before I decide to bring the colony up to the surface. Or retreat down and come up with another plan. Moving down the aisle towards the large double doors at the rear of the church, I hesitate a moment before pushing them open with my mandibles and taking in the surface of this world for the first time. A brilliant sunset is the first thing that meets my eyes, the alien sky dyed with intense reds and pinks. Lovely. Not much scenery to appreciate in the tunnel after all, causing this sight to hit perhaps a little harder than I would have thought. Focus. No time to get caught up in a sunset. Shaking myself slightly, I turn to take a look at the surroundings. The church appears to be situated on a hill, a cobbled path leading directly up to the doors. Spread before me looks to be a sleepy town, smoke curling from chimneys that poke proudly out of slatted roofs. In the distance, I can see farming fields spread like a carpet that press up against a walled city. Checking my tunnel map quickly, I estimate the previous dungeon entrance I had located seems like it would be smack bang in the middle of that city. So, things could have been worse, I suppose. In fact, if I focus my eyes carefully, I think there is a fire in that city. Against the darkening skies, I'm fairly sure a plume of black smoke is rising from somewhere inside the walls. Some sort of situation happening over there. I don't especially want to wish harm on anyone over there, but this could be a chance for the colony to slip away without notice. After turning back to eyeball the congregation again, I scurry around the side of the church and take a peek around the corner. The church doesn't seem to be as large as I had originally thought it was, a sturdy stone building with a high vaulted ceiling to be sure, but it isn't exactly a cathedral. It seems to have been constructed on the edge of this town, high on the hill overlooking the more simple homes of the people, many of whom possibly work farming the surrounding fields. On the rear side of the church, down the hill and over a few open paddocks a lush wood is spread, thick foliage creating a beckoning darkness across the forest floor. Just the sort of place a colony could go and get lost in. I might be able to salvage this after all. I turn and head back inside where many members of the congregation have begun to offer prayers of a much different sort to the statue, hoping for salvation and survival rather than whatever the heck they had thought was coming their way before. The priest is still clutching his arm, almost completely inert. I think the shock has hit him pretty bad. Poor guy. I can't help but feel a twinge of guilt. I did bite his arm off. I head back to the hole in the floor, stick my back zone through so I can talk to the queen. It's a little weird, the pheromone conversation. We listen with our antennae but we talk with our pheromone gland, which is positioned in the rear zone. Could you come up here and heal a person? I injured him, but I think it would be bad for us if he died. I can tell the queen is a little surprised, but she quickly agrees with my suggestion and begins to chomp and push her way up through the floor, buckling the flat stones and forcing the wooden pews to scrape and scratch on the floor as she forces her bulk through. If I thought the humans were fervently wishing for salvation before, their efforts are redoubles with the emergence of the queen. She fills the room with her majesty and abdomen, forcing the people to push themselves back against the walls, openly weeping in terror and this manifestation of the dungeon's evil. The queen doesn't seem much fussed. She channels mana through her antennae for a moment and then touches the priest on the arm. The light flares as it passes into his flesh and the wound rapidly closes over, the bleeding slowing to almost nothing in a matter of seconds. I think with this his life will be preserved, at the very least he won't bleed to death. With no way to communicate to reassure the people, I decide it's best just to hustle the colony out of there. Giving instructions to the queen and the workers, we gather up the larvae and pupae before marching out of the church towards the forest. The eyes of the congregation are almost popping out of their head as rows of monsters ants pour out of this hole in the center of their church, marching past whilst totally ignoring them. I myself head down into the escape tunnel to help move, and I'm shocked when a fat grub wiggles towards me, flopping about on the ground with glee. Are you that energetic grub I saved from the brood chamber? I shouldn't be shocked you survived, I suppose. You do seem to have an unusual amount of spunk. With that, Tiny, the colony and myself carry everything we belong and walk out, past the disbelieving and hopeful faces of the colony, out the front of the church, across the field and then beneath into the welcoming arms of the forest. All the while the burning gaze of the priest follows me as I walk. Chapter 122, New Home. I'd never thought that running through a field of wheat could be quite so thrilling. Perhaps everyone had been wrong on that front. As I hustled along, Tiny in tow carrying my precious monster cores in one large paw and the rest of the colony following along behind, I couldn't help but panic the entire way, worrying that we'd be spotted. Who exactly was going to spot us crossing a farm field at dusk, the sun having fallen almost completely below the horizon? I'm not sure. Perhaps the dragon guards of legend would swoop out of the sky and smite me with a thunder hammer or something. I have no idea how things operate up here. For all I know, there are wizards that could vaporize the entire colony from kilometers away. Right up until the moment the last worker is safely under the cover of trees, I keep stressing. When finally the entire workforce is safe and the queen, surrounded by her dedicated cadre of ants, has been escorted into the forest, I sigh in relief. Feeling a little more comfortable, I make my way to the head of our monstrous ant convoy as we plunge into unknown territory. There is something faintly magical about this forest. It's old. Even I can tell that much with my limited outdoors experience. The trees look wrinkled and wise beneath their broad canopies, stretching to the sun like the elderly doing morning exercise. At this late hour a mist is beginning to rise from the damp litter of the forest floor, further concealing our movements as we rush further into these woods. Wait a sec. Heat. My antennae are constantly scanning and sweeping as we advance, and eventually I detect a heat signature ahead and slightly to the left, as if some creature were waiting crouched in the growth as we approach. I decide to continue to advocate as if I had no knowledge of this interloper, wanting to see exactly what kind of action it would choose to take. Will it attack? Will it flee? I don't know anything about this forest or about the creatures who live here. Any chance to learn something should be seized. Knowledge is power to the monster. My antennae continue to twitch about as I lead the trail of ants. The heat source has continued to remain still as I draw closer. I even adjust my path so that I'll be right next to the source as I pass, but it doesn't twitch in response. Eventually I move within only a few feet of it. I can clearly see the hiding place now, a dense shrub with thickly intertwined branches providing total visual cover. Sadly for this beastie, my advanced senses are completely aware of their location. My main worry in the event of an attack is the larvae I'm carrying in my mandibles. This feisty grub refuses to sit still, insisting on wiggling about as if admiring the view. You don't have eyes, you little grub. What is the point of trying to get a better view? If I'm attacked, I'll have to ensure the grub remains unharmed, and somehow retaliate without using my mandibles, which are fully occupied with said grub. Sure enough, just as I pass by, the bush suddenly rustles and the creature attacks. Thin, twisted flesh, bird sin, vicious fangs and a crude dagger are all I can see clearly as the creature emerges in a rush, bringing its weapon down in a vicious slice. I've seen it all, you chump. Curling slightly, I present my diamond carapace to the weapon, shielding the grub with my body and rotating my face away from it. The blade flashes down. Ting. The blade harmlessly pings off my carapace. The recoil twists the creature's arm on a terrible angle, possibly breaking it. I'm not sure who is more shocked by the total lack of damage inflicted, the monster or me. Better safe than sorry, I suppose. Completing my rotation, I present the business zone towards this furry humanoid and blast it with acid. Pow! Already wounded by the rebound of its own strike, the creature howls pitifully as the acid blasts it off its feet and congeals, pinning it to the ground. You have slain level 9 Ilferum. You have gained experience. So weak. Super weak. One blast of acid and you're dead. Are you kidding me? I'm pretty sure you broke your own arm just by attacking me. This isn't a some comedy. Disgusted by the weakness of this monster, I'm not even sure that I want to eat it. Is this what monsters are like on the surface? Surely the difference can't be this much. I shouldn't get ahead of myself. One skinny fur man in the woods isn't representative of all surface monsters. I should stay watchful. Disregarding the remains of this creature, the convoy continues to wind its way deeper in the woods. A long column consisting of hundreds of ants marches along in near perfect silence. After about an hour, I halt the column and look about. We have arrived in a small clearing in the wood. Strong trees surround us on all sides. The soil appears soft and rich beneath my feet. The lush undergrowth is pleasing on the eyes and indicates that this forest is vibrant and full of life. Seems like a good spot. We should be far enough away from human civilization for the time being. At the very least, I hope they won't be able to find us in one day. To be honest, I'd rather be further away than this, but I have no idea how large this forest is. If we keep marching, there is a chance that we'll run clean out the other side and into more farmland. Better to put down some roots and scout out the situation before we make any more moves. Wait here a sec. I shout to the workers, who waggle their antennae at me and tap my head as I wander past. Roughly in the middle of our convoy, I find the queen, looming over her subjects as they escort her forward. I think I've found a place for us to build a nest. Might be a good idea to get the larvae settled down and go hunting. Hopefully we can find a decent amount of biomass up here. The queen simply nods her assent. I think she's a lot more tired than she's letting on. The only member of the colony to get no rest at all since the beginning of the wave is her, after all. She probably needs some sleep more than the grubs do. Ants being what they are, it doesn't take long for the colony to begin construction on a crude nest. It's honestly a little moving to see them in action. Hundreds of ants swarming, tearing into the soil with relentless energy. In a matter of hours, there is a simple ant hill erected in the clearing, nearly as tall as the treetops. Inside, the colony has packed into a few simple chambers, tending to the brood, whilst the queen has finally been able to get some rest, nervously watched by her defenders, right in the heart of the new nest at the bottom. I myself managed to excavate a small chamber for myself and Tiny to curl up in, my precious monster cores nearby and the little grub I carried nestled in one corner. I'm so damn tired. Please nothing happen at the very least until I get some sleep. Chapter 123, New Territory. Since the cataclysm and the opening of the dungeon to sentient surface dwellers, expeditions to the underground spaces for resources have been a constant in society. Not only for the abundance of experience provided by the dungeon monsters, far above that which can be attained above ground, but for the precious resources that can be found there. Rare mineral types never seen before, underground trees whose wood contains incredible properties, gems infused with mana are all highly prized, but the monsters themselves have always held the greatest treasure. It is well known on the surface that certain monster parts, when treated correctly, can be prevented from dissolving back into the dungeon and then turned into miraculous equipment and tools that cannot be replicated using only surface materials. Although expensive to purchase, items crafted from monster parts can be found in almost any civilized town. Often something as simple as plow could be constructed using centipede fangs as the blade, or carved completely from the tough bones of a larger beast. More sought after still are the precious monster cores. It isn't known exactly how or why monsters form cores, but what is known is that they constantly absorb and compress mana, giving the monsters a rich source of power within their own bodies, something no surface race has been able to achieve. Mages are able to perform their miracles by drawing on and shaping the energy found in the area around them or from specially crafted mana stores on their person, but none has ever achieved the internal storage that the core allows monsters. What's more, the core of a monster retains these properties after death, constantly absorbing and storing mana. When combined with skillful enchanting techniques, cores, especially larger, powerful ones, can be used to create the most powerful weapons and artifacts, hence their incredible value. Excerpt from Cultural Study of Pangera and the Dungeon. Chapter 6. By the Magio Scholar Terius. Minus 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 minus. Like a slumbering giant, the colony rested that night. The workers had been pushing themselves hard, just as I had, and almost the entire workforce sank into torpor with only a few guards patrolling on the ant hill outside. Over 500 monsters, crammed into a small space, each as still as a ghost. Hundreds more larvae and pupae filled every corner of our new nest, the next generation of workers growing ever closer to their time of awakening. When I finally shake myself out of torpor, I feel refreshed in a way I haven't felt for a long time. So good. I can sleep as much as I want and I don't have to battle something to the death the moment I wake up. The lousy wave is in the rear view mirror for the time being, and it is a massive weight off my shoulders. I'm not so foolish to think we will continue to remain untouched by it up here, but at the very least I can enjoy this respite from the constant danger. Looking around my cramped little chamber, I can see Tiny curled up in ball, still snoring away happily. Even rolled up, he takes by far the most space in here. He continues to get larger as he eats. Exactly how big is he going to get? I'm also pleasantly surprised when I spot the other occupant of the room. Instead of the energetic little grub I saw when I'd gone to sleep in here, there is instead a thick cocoon leaning up against the wall. A pupa. The little grub must have woven its cocoon whilst I was sleeping. Using my antennae, I give a few light taps to the white exterior in order to inspect the pupa. This is the transformative stage of an ant's development, where they turn from a blind grub into a fully formed ant. This grub was so energetic before. I wonder how it'll behave as a worker. Certainly the pupa seems a little different than those I'd seen before. I'm not sure I can put my finger on exactly why. Mentally shrugging, I turn to the other, precious occupant of this room, my cores. Wait. Weren't there more of these before? Shocked, I rush over to my collection like a bird flying to defend its nest. Yes, I'm sure of it. I'm missing 2 cores. I frantically check the remaining gems with my antennae. Phew. The Jellymo core is still here. I have plans for that one. Irritated, I turn towards Tiny and slap him awake with an antenna. He must have absorbed them in his sleep, this greedy ape. So you've gone from refusing to accept any cores to stealing them now, huh? Wop wop wop. Eventually Tiny is roused by my furious swiping and blearily unfolds himself. He seems completely unaware that I've been hitting him as he yawns and stretches before turning back to me. Food? He asks. Some things never change, I suppose. Come on, let's go hunting. The 2 of us make our way out of our home and up the main shaft of the nest until we reach the top of the anthill. The rest of the colony is similarly waking up. Dozens of workers are pouring out of their chambers and getting busy around the colony, some heading lower in order to tend to the queen, others checking in on the brood, most of which has transformed into pupa by this time. Soon the colony will go past 1,000 workers. That does raise a problem though. We need food. Ants on Earth have a voracious appetite, tearing through huge amounts of other insects and small creatures in order to obtain protein to grow their young. Mature ants on Earth don't really need to eat meat themselves, they mainly rely on sugars to keep themselves going. Not here on Pangera. The monstrous ants need biomass to keep themselves kicking and growing stronger, just like the young. This means the monstrous ant colony has an even larger appetite when compared to normal ants. Time to hunt. Already scouts are starting to pour into the forest, 20 to 30 of them darting off to try and locate something for the colony to feast on. More and more workers are massing on the anthill every second, slowly expanding outwards and pushing gradually into the forest, waiting for a signal to go and collect food. Tiny and I drift off into the forest, moving in the opposite direction to the human town that we'd seen. I don't want to get closer to civilization, and I would love to know just how large this forest is. Something tells me that with a fairly major-looking city nearby, I shouldn't expect it to be massive. As long as we can hide out here for a week or two, I'll be happy. What follows is a fairly dull day of plodding through forest looking for prey. Tiny and I are more successful than most of the scouts, due to my enhanced senses obviously, but even so there doesn't seem to be a high concentration of monsters nearby the nest. I run into a few more of those hairy skinny things, each of them wielding crude tools or weapons that heaven only knows where they got them from. They go down with even less of a fight than the first one did, if that is even possible. Tiny punched one, and the creature practically exploded. Surface monsters are clearly not up to the standard of us dungeon dwellers. Which leads me to another conundrum. If I want to improve my skills, I'll need to level up and gain biomass. If I want to evolve or develop my core manipulation abilities, I'll need a steady supply of cores, and so far those appear to be thin on the ground up here. As the day draws on, I'm led more and more to the thought that even though we just escaped from the dungeon, we are still going to need access to it. Without dungeon monsters to fight the colony, and I can only stagnate. I won't accept that. Chapter 124: Strange New Life. To tunnel or not to tunnel? And even in the event that tunneling does in fact occur, where to tunnel? It isn't reasonable to expect that a largish city would be built on the very edge of some monster-infested wild frontier. I can see that now, but I really did hope that there would be more monsters in here for us to eat. Aside from those hairy scraggly things, the only monsters we have encountered are creatures that are fairly close to regular forest animals on Earth. The occasional slightly larger boar, some deer with sparkly horns, a few decently sized birds. Enough to get a bit of food around, but completely insufficient to fuel the XP and biomass needs to power up the colony. There is only one place to get what we need, and it just so happens to be the place we only just escaped from. Damn it. I'm going to have to dig down to the dungeon again. The question is, where? I'm certainly not going to dig straight down from inside the new anthill, that would be completely stupid. Perhaps I could just create a new tunnel a few hundred meters away that Tiny and I could use for hunting, perhaps leading workers down there in hunting parties. The other option is to head back to the existing tunnel which opens up within the church. Perhaps some monsters are even climbing out of there already, invading the surface. For his own sake, I hope that priest doesn't try to give those monsters his blessing like he did me. He won't escape with only the loss of one arm as he tries to smack an earth bear tyrant on the head. Thinking about the human town causes a slight pang in my chest. I still don't know how to think about the humans of this world, or how I should relate to them. Part of what bothers me most is how much less I consider them than I used to. Perhaps accepting the colony as my new family has drawn me closer to accepting my monstrous life. I mean, experience has now shown me that I have no hope of ever being part of human society again, so perhaps my feelings are drawing away from them more as time goes on. Still, I hope that by tunneling into the middle of the town we haven't inadvertently caused the deaths of hundreds of ultimately blameless people. I might have to sneak back there soon to see how things are going. For now, Tiny and I are continuing our first sweep through this forest. We haven't gone too far from the nest on the first outing, just in case of the unexpected, but so far the hunting has been quite mundane. The forest itself is lovely, old and lush, full the sounds one would hope to hear in an old wood. There is a peaceful vibe to it that I'm quite enjoying. The place is so still compared to the dungeon, especially since the wave hit. Hang on a sec. I'm getting a heat reading from over near that tree. Signaling to Tiny with my antennae, I point towards the tree. This is my new system I've been working on with my ape companion, a few quick non-verbal signals I can make with my antennae only. It's simple enough that even the big ape has managed to grasp it. His eyes brighten at the prospect of prey and he quickly starts scanning for it in the direction I indicated. A frown almost immediately creases his face as he fails to notice anything and glances back to me with his hang-dog bad expression. Don't look at me, buddy, I can't see it either. The tree in front of us is clearly old. Thick, gnarled roots curl around the base of the tree and twist their way into the soil beneath. The thick trunk isn't smooth around but rather covered in curls and knots, clumps of moss dappling the trunk and hanging from its boughs. This is strange. I can clearly detect that there is a source of heat only a few meters in front of me, but all I can see is tree. This is curious. My interest has been piqued. Why is this tree giving the vibes of a creature? I mean, I know trees are alive, but they shouldn't be look this right. I gradually approach the tree, my eyes agog at this strange mystery. Tiny has grown bored and it's sitting on his backside studying the hair dangling off his arm. Damn it, Tiny. Where is your sense of wonder? Eventually I've grown close to enough to the tree that my antennae are tapping it up and down directly. I can clearly detect heat from this, something that no other tree has shown in the forest. Just what is it about this tree? At that moment, as my antennae are tippity-tapping on the bark of this tree, something odd happens. The tree giggles. Ah. Tippity-tappity-tap. Giggle. Tippity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity. As my antennae go completely crazy on the trunk of this tree, a section of wood starts to wiggle with laughter and detaches away from the rest of the tree before collapsing on the ground. Before my eyes, a strange woodish humanoid is rolling about on the dirt, thin root-like fingers at the end of gnarled mossy arms attached to a thin, branch-like body. When the thing notices that I'm no longer tickling it with my antennae, it suddenly stops moving and I notice two deep green eyes staring up at me from what I can now tell is a gnarled bark face. Tippity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity-tappity. When I resume my antenna tapping, the creature immediately resumes laughing and giggling as it rolls around on the ground like a small child. What the heck is this thing? Next to me, Tiny has wadded over and is staring down at the creature with his beady bat eyes. I can tell exactly what he is thinking. Can we eat this? You know what, Tiny, I'm not sure. Chapter 125. It all comes back to mana. For the time being, Tiny and I resist the temptation to try eating this strange tree creature. After a few minutes of tickling, I back away a few steps, making it clear that tickle time is over, and I wait to see how the creature will respond. After wiggling about on the ground for a moment, then giving me the puppy dog eyes for a little while longer, the strange branch monster eventually stands up. Now that it's standing on its own 2 feet, I can get a better look at it. This thing is skinny. Rather than a walking tree, it puts me more in the mind of a stick insect. The body is more of a branch than a trunk, and 4 humanoid-like limbs extend organically, with little sign of joints. The monster doesn't have a head of any kind really, the face peeks out from the top of the torso, the wrinkles and grooves in the wood giving rise to surprisingly expressive features. Tiny is radiating disappointment as he gets a closer look at the monster. I think he's sad at how thin the monster is. It isn't likely he'd be able to get much of a feed from it. Blissfully ignorant of being weighed for biomass, the Branchy looks at the two of us with eyes twinkling deep in that weathered face before gesturing for the two of us to follow and walking briskly off into the forest. I hesitate for a moment before I decide to follow. I've not seen anything in this forest that is a match for Tiny and myself at this stage. We should be fairly safe. Besides, I want to learn a little more about this walking wood stick if I can. It seems relatively harmless and is the only creature other than Formo that hasn't reacted with hostility upon seeing me. So I follow along with Tiny trundling in my wake. It isn't long before we have to speed up though. The Branchy is fast. Despite being shorter than Tiny, so skinny a stiff breeze could knock it down, and not having knees, the Branchy really motors along. Could it be the lack of air resistance? Whatever the reason, Tiny and I have to quickly raise our pace, and in the end we have to sprint along behind the Branchy for 10 solid minutes before it finally stops when we reach a beautiful section of forest. A small pond in the center sits perfectly still, ringed with spectacularly old-looking trees. The air is so still here, as if nothing has drawn breath in this spot for 100 years. The Branchy smiles at us, the folds and twists of the wood curving to create the expression, before walking towards one of the trees and just blending into it. I almost can't believe my eyes. 1 second the Branchy was there, walking, and the next it was just gone. I can still detect it with my heat-sensitive antennae though. As I wave my antennae about this section of forest, I actually detect a few more signals from the nearby trees. Curious, I wind my way around the pond and I find more than 20 responses from the trees in the area. It looks like the branchie brought us back to its community. It doesn't appear as if they want to come out and greet us though. I get the feeling these are particularly shy monsters, hiding from their enemies by using their impressive tree melding skills. There must be something special about this spot for these tree creatures to make their homes here. My attention turns back to the pond. Do I detect a faintly familiar shimmer to this water? Out of curiosity, I flip on my mana sensing and sure enough the pond lights up with a faint response. The water is infused with mana. Nostalgia comes flooding back as I recall the pond in the first chamber I'd entered after being reborn. By drinking that water I'd taken the mana into my body, which had expedited the formation of my core. This water probably has similar properties. The branchies must have formed their community here due to the mana in this water. Or perhaps they were formed from the trees here. The trees drinking in this water with their roots may have been what created these tree creatures in the first place. In the end, it all comes back to mana. This mysterious energy that can be turned into almost anything, has a seemingly unlimited supply and can even create life itself. I can't help but feel that somewhere deep in the dungeon the source of this energy resides. I have no evidence for that, but it just seems right. I mean, it has to come from somewhere. Actually, it has to come from somewhere. Right? So how did it get into this pool? With a thought tingling in my mind, I retreat from the pool about 30 meters, Tiny trailing curiously behind me. Once I've created enough distance, I start to dig. Furiously ripping into the dirt with my mandibles, I make rapid progress. Before too long, I've managed to tunnel down 10 meters, slightly angled towards the pond. Gasping for breath after my exertions, I activate my mana sense and eagerly look towards the pond. And there it is. Under the pond there is a thin tendril of mana that reaches up right towards the bottom of that pond. It's the dungeon. It's extremely thin, just a tiny little thread, but it's enough to bleed mana out of the dungeon and up into the waters of this pond. If I were to dig down further, I would definitely be able to connect a small tunnel to the dungeon and begin farming XP and biomass. This is excellent news. I'll have to thank those branchies somehow. They've saved me a lot of effort. This will also give me a place I can recharge my mana, which will allow me to more rapidly develop my magic skills. Everything is coming up, Anthony. Not willing to wait a second, I throw myself into my digging efforts. Burrowing deep under the pond to try and avoid the saturated water, I try to connect myself to that tiny thread of mana. As I dig down, I can see it more and more clearly, extending deep into the ground. All in all, it takes a few hours for me to dig my way down to that thin tendril of dungeon, but when I do, it is a glorious sight to behold. The bright glow of mana shines in my eyes once more. The mana veins have wound their way up even in this space. To be honest, I may have saved the branchies and perhaps even the humans with this effort of mine. It may have been possible that the mana veins would expand upwards and connect directly to the pool. It may have even been possible that they would start spawning monsters directly on the surface. As it is, I'm delighted to see those mana veins start to extend out into my new tunnel slowly. I'm assuming monsters didn't spawn in that thin crack since there wasn't enough space for them. As the veins extend deep into my tunnel, the monster spawning will soon follow. Mwahaha. Success. Elated in the extreme, I bring Tiny down my cramped little tunnel to help me dig and expand it out in preparation for the monster spawning. After several more hours' work, we dug out a relatively open chamber with a more narrow opening that stands fairly high above the floor, hopefully preventing any monsters from escaping up the surface, except for those that spawn in the surface tunnel once the veins have extended that far, but I want to limit the surface exposure as much as possible. After digging out this huge space, I'm pretty knackered. It might be time to head back to the colony and then come back here after a nap to see how things have progressed. With a little luck, a lot of effort, I should be able to create a nice monster farming network here, giving the colony a healthy shortcut to pump up in size and strength. The only drawback is that Tiny and myself won't be able to strengthen ourselves much here. The monsters will simply be too low a level to provide enough XP and biomass for us to gain much. I shake my head. This is a problem for another time. For now, we head back to the colony where I drain all my mana practicing my shaping, getting myself to level 9 before taking a well-earned rest. Chapter 126. Just so skillful. 2 days pass quickly in our new environment. So blissful. So peaceful. I haven't had anything threatening happen to me for over 48 hours. I could go soft at this rate. What's even more amusing is watching just how bored Tiny is. The big guy is almost catatonic, craving the stimulus of battle like a drug he's withdrawing from. Other than eating, he just flops about sleeping or staring at the walls. He is so still that the workers just crawl over him as he lies there. To be honest, I feel a little bad for him. I can sympathize to some extent. Battling with your life on the line is terrifying but at the same time extremely thrilling, and the rewards provided give such immediate gratification that it becomes hard to resist the lure of combat. After spending time in those dangerous places, living on the edge constantly, our relatively peaceful environment here on the surface is a little boring. It's like our intense days were filled with shockingly vibrant splashes of color, but now our scene is far more muted and tranquil. Just like Tiny, I can also feel the itching in my heart for action. Unlike that dumb ape though, I know how to keep myself busy and getting stronger even without high-level monsters to fight. I keep every day full. Tiny and I spent most of yesterday down in our monster farming zone. I was pleased to see that the veins had rapidly extended and monsters had already been spawning by the time we got back, the familiar scenes of chaos a welcome sight in my eyes. I gave Tiny an order that he probably never wanted to hear and instructed to him to disable the monsters but not kill them. The horror on this bat face is amusing even now. He couldn't refuse though and reluctantly ran through the small chamber, smashing legs and crippling the monsters without landing the final blow. It was a horrifying sight actually, all those monsters on the floor, unable to even crawl or defend themselves. When that job was done, I laid down a food trail for the colony and soon a flood of workers poured into the small chamber, finishing off the monsters and carrying their precious biomass back to the colony. Tiny and I took a little food to stave off our hunger and then set to digging, expanding the farm a bit further out. Since Tiny and I are both double-evolved monsters and the creatures spawning in our farm are base level, we get a greatly reduced fraction of the XP and biomass when we kill and eat them. It just isn't worth it for us to monopolize these resources, especially considering that we need far more experience and biomass in total to advance when compared to the workforce. To maximize efficiency, I've decided to use the farm to power level the colony. I really want more workers to advance and evolve, then they could fight more effectively without me around. Tiny and I will have to do something soon about our stagnating levels, but what exactly I haven't worked out. Still, after we expanded the farm and I asked the workers to leave so the monsters could build up again, I put my mind to practicing my magic skills. With the low-level monsters popping out in the farm, I had a few targets for me to practice my spells on. So far the only shape I'd been able to put into action was the gravity domain, but there are more tucked away in my head and now I have a moment to test them out. The first spell I tried required me to shape an intricate ball that tapered to a point on one end. I failed quite a few times on this one, I'll admit, but with my gravitational mana topped off I was in no risk of running out. Eventually I was able to finish shaping the complex construction and powered it up. Once it was ready I instinctually aimed it and fired. The ball-like spell zipped through the air at blinding speed and impacted against the monster I'd targeted in less than a second. Once it hit, the spell expanded out, encompassing the creature in complex, revolving shapes which collapsed inwards a moment later. Hoping for something spectacular to happen, I was a bit disappointed when the target simply slumped to the ground and lay still. It was still alive since I'd received no notification from he with the fluffy face. So what exactly happened? After a moment I noticed one of the creature's claws twitching slightly as it struggled to raise it. Then I realized it had been placed under the effect of powerful gravity. So this spell allowed me to fire off a gravity effect to a target further away from me, as opposed to the domain which only affects those immediately around me. I called it Gravity Bolt. So pleased that I spent the next hour zapping creatures with bolts and watching them collapse on the floor, unable to lift a finger until the effect wore off. I found I could change the duration and strength of the effect depending on exactly how much I powered different parts of the construct, which led to my most impressive discovery. Since I'd been able to identify the section of the construct that powered the effect, would I be able to make some changes to that part of the spell in order to modify the effect produced by the spell? I mean, I was still using gravitational energy, so the spell would still have a gravity effect, but what if rather than pulling the monsters down, it pulled them up? I mean, it's gravity, right? The force of gravity is produced by the energy in the spell, not the planet we are on. There isn't any reason it has to pull them down, right? It took me ages to rework the spell, even though it was a relatively simple change. I wasn't changing the spell per se, but rather reconstructing one section of it upside down. I only succeeded once in my first practice. I'd been getting frustrated after a few dozen attempts when finally things started to run smoothly, Excitedly I poured my energy into the construct and blasted it towards a newly born centipede the moment it was ready. Once struck, a similar scene appeared. The bolt expanded into the revolving shapes that collapsed into the monster before it suddenly blasted towards the ceiling, impacting the roof with a sickening crunch. I think I put too much juice in that one. Still, the effect worked. I was so pleased I did a little dance on the spot. I can really tap now that I have 6 legs, it has to be said. If I could successfully remodel the gravity domain with the inverted effect, then I'd be able to make every monster around me float helplessly off the ground. I can't wait to try it. The next day, after feeding the colony again and doing some more digging to expand the farm, I got to practicing a second spell. This shape was a little more demanding than the bolt, but eventually I was able to get it formed. Once formed, the construct looked like a spear with several rings rotating around the haft. Rather than the spear shape, those rings were the tricky bit, each one formed of many smaller rings assembled like a maddening puzzle. When I fired the spear off, it zapped out of my body and streaked towards my target. Once impacted, the spear stuck in the monster's body whilst the rings expanded outwards, encompassing a small area around the creature before once again collapsing inwards. The monster appeared rather shocked to suddenly see a spear poking out of its chest. Tentatively it tested the wound with one claw, only to realize it wasn't wounded at all. I was a little crestfallen. What the heck does this spear even do? Then I noticed something. When the rings had expanded, a nearby thorn lizard had been caught inside the zone, and now that lizard was being pulled towards my target monster irresistibly. Eventually the little lizard couldn't resist the pull anymore and flew through the air towards my target, spikes first. So this spell creates a powerful gravity field around the target monster, pulling nearby creatures towards it. Muhahaha. I shall call it Gravity Spear. It's fine. These tests were not my only labors over the last 2 days either. Each night before torpor I emptied my core doing shaping practice for hours and hours. On the second night I was finally rewarded. Mana shaping has reached level 10, upgrade available. Yes. The power is mine. I even high-five myself using my antennae after Tiny leaves me hanging. Mana shaping minus mana transformation. Cost 1 SP, this skill guides through the complex process of changing raw, non-attribute mana into another kind. With increasing levels, this skill will provide greater assistance and proficiency in the process. Finally. Buy that. When I confirm the purchase, an overwhelming sensation flows over my brain as knowledge comes flooding in. Chapter 127 Embers. By the system, it hurt. It had ever since he'd lost it in that one moment, where the shining picture he had painted of himself had been ripped away along with his limb. Even now, several days later, Bane was at a loss to explain exactly what had occurred at that time. The fear that had gripped his heart, when that monster had burst into the middle of his sermon, he could recall it perfectly even now. When the beast had remained so still, so accepting, that fear had been replaced with wonder. It was as if the holy system had been speaking to him directly, offering itself to him, asking that he accept the fruits of its blessed creations. What joy! What reverence! In that moment Bane had felt as if he had touched the foot of God. The surging emotions that had blazed in his heart as he had brought the church scriptum down on the head of the offering had been so powerful he almost shook now just recalling it. He had been so wrong. His visions of a grand destiny, of being a prophet of the system, had been torn away as that terrifying monster had darted forth, so quickly he couldn't even see it, and brought those serrated jaws down on his arm, shearing it away with ease. Since that moment he had barely spoken. The haunting zeal in eyes had intimidated the townspeople to the point they couldn't meet his glare. They had taken him to the apothecary for treatment and left him there, speaking softly as they passed by his door. To be honest, he needed no physical healing. The spell performed on him by the godless monster had closed the wound. To do better would require a powerful specialist in the healing arts to regenerate his arm. Even in his dazed state, laying in his bed, Bane was able to pick up bits and pieces of information from the nervous conversations he overheard. There was trouble at the capital, fighting in the streets. People had been fleeing the city until the gates had been barred. The queen was dead. The queen was alive. It was a coup, it was an invasion, it was the dungeon rising for a second cataclysm. On the second day he heard that the town council had called a meeting to discuss the crises. Slowly the blood began to stir in Bane's veins. He couldn't lie here forever. The system, his god, was stirring, he could feel it. He must be a part of the events to come, and he would be. Casting off his blankets, stood and strode out of his room with purposeful steps. As the wounded priest strode through the town, the people subconsciously turned their eyes away, doffing their cap or offering a brief curtsy before moving out of his path. They could not bear to meet the righteous zeal ablaze in his eyes. The priest marched through the town to the mayor's house, sweeping open the door with his good arm and entering with long strides. Inside, a huddle of the town's dignitaries huddled around the desk of a beleaguered fat man. The livery of the mayor hung over his silk robes. The mayor's eyes brightened when he saw Bane enter. "Ah! Look, gentlemen, our good priest in the faith has arisen from his convalescence so quickly. This is cause for celebration. We should delay this meeting until after we have properly toasted this happy occasion." Several people in the chamber erupted in cheers whilst others sighed, heads falling into hands. The owner of the market, Mrs. Ruther, attempted to protest the suspension of discussion, but to no avail. The mayor had already called on his servants to go and fetch wine for his guests and be quick about it, damn it. Contempt flickered in Bane's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. This idiot would do anything to get out of his responsibilities and drink. A few more years of soaking and his family wealth may just run dry, with the wine soon to follow. "If it please my lord Ebruis, the discussion should not be delayed. It is for the purpose of conversing with you and the council that I have arisen from my rest," Bane smoothly interjected. The quivering intensity in his voice was unnerving enough that even Ebruis could not deny it. Oh, very well. Are you sure you would not rather rest, Father Bane? You do not appear to have even had a chance to change your robes," the mayor spluttered in a feeble attempt to put off his work. "Do the robes of my faith, marked with the blood I have shed in the name of the system, offend you, Lord Mayor?" The fat man paled in fright before raising his hands and shaking them in protest. "I dare not, Father. I intended no such thing." "Very well then. If I may." At this, Bane took a vacant chair and gestured towards Mrs. Ruther. "I would be grateful to you, Mrs. Ruther, if you would apprise me of what has occurred in the last 2 days. Have the monsters threatened us?" Somewhat surprised at being called on, the elderly matron took a moment to gather her dignity before replying. "They haven't, Father. We've not seen so much as a leg of those ants since they marched into the forest after you were attacked." After saying this, she quickly met Bane's gaze before flicking her eyes away, as if scalded by the fire she saw there. "More troubling than the monsters, as strange as that is to say, is the disturbance in the capital. We haven't had a reliable message out of there all day. Fighting in the streets, the soldiers setting fire to the merchant district, blood on the steps of the castle. It sounds dreadful. The people are too scared to work, gazing at the smoke rising over the walls from dawn to dusk." With his good hand, Bane gripped his chair so hard his knuckles cracked. "This disturbance in the capital is more important, you say? More important than the agents of the dungeon rising from beneath our very feet? More than just passion?" Hatred now dripped from every word from the priest's mouth, causing those closest from him to draw away from him. Mrs. Ruther gathered herself before she retorted. "There hasn't been a single victim of those monsters in this town, but we hear of hundreds dead inside the city. Most of us have family in their father. I'm terribly sorry for your injury. We all are, but we've got more pressing issues than those ants." At this, Bane rose to his feet and burst out loudly. "For the first time in 1,000 years, the dungeon has reached up and delivered its servants to the very surface, and you are distracted by petty fighting in the city. Do you not see the grander destiny that has been laid out before us?" A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats at these words. Mayor Ebruis attempted to calm the agitated priest. "You did say something similar at the church 2 days ago, Father, and, well, that didn't turn out so well." Bane turned his blazing righteous gaze on the mayor and then at the others one by one until all had turned from him and were silent. "At first I believed that the great system had called on us, had blessed this town by delivering his greatest blessing, experience, to raise us up and forge us for a new purpose. I still believe that is the case. This," here he waved the bandaged stump of his arm in the faces of the council, "was my misjudgment. I had foolishly believed that the system had delivered its fruit to us and all we had to do was pluck it, but no. There are no gifts within the system, only rewards. Rewards that are rightly earned, and so I was punished for my transgression." Ebruis waved his hands to try and relax the priest, but it was to no avail. "We have to take up arms, can you not see that?" Bane exhorted the council. "Those hideous beasts, led by that demon ant, shall return. Not only this, more will come. I assure you. Our trial is not yet complete. The people must be told. We must rise to this test." After these words, Bane strode forth, leaving the flabbergasted council behind. He marched to the town square, where he began to preach with mesmerizing power, stretching the limits of his oratory skill to bend the hearts of the people. A crowd slowly gathered, and that evening, when several monsters emerged from the hole in the church, he urged the people to arm themselves and led the crowd personally in a great charge up the hill into the building wherein those creatures were defeated. The people roared in triumph and celebrated their victory, but Bane was unmoved. He asked that a watch be put on the church and turned his gaze towards the forest. Chapter 128 Core Farming. I need cores. Like, super badly. I need cores for me. I need cores for Tiny. I need cores for experimenting. I need cores to raise my skills. I need cores to fuse into more powerful cores for myself and for Tiny, and I need cores for my other side project. Cores. The number of monster cores we had extracted so far from the farm was a grand total of 1. When Tiny and I went in there to cripple the creatures this morning, we found a monstrous toad had already slaughtered most of the creatures inside. Tiny had excitedly rushed to engage it, charging up his lightning fist and exploded the foe with 1 punch. Luckily he hadn't destroyed the core. Still, 1 core every 3 days is not nearly enough to meet my needs. I refuse. I just don't have a solution to this problem currently. Tiny and I are currently resting in the nest. A contented bustle has come over the colony recently as the workers have been busy doing the things that workers love to do. Tending to the brood, expanding the nests, foraging for food. Our new anthill has become impressively large now, the top reaching towards the peak of the trees. I had to ask them not to make it any higher or we'll end up too easy to spot. Our main objective is to hide and ride out the wave after all. I want no trouble, be it human or otherwise. To my delight, the pupae have started to hatch over the last few hours, hundreds of new workers emerging to swell the ranks of the colony. When this generation finally emerges, we will have reached the 1,000 worker mark. A milestone in the life of a young colony, to be sure. This is nothing though. If we expand the farm a little and keep the supply of biomass coming, it won't be long until we reach 2,000, 5,000, 100,000. That was the other exciting thing to happen this morning. The queen finally awoke from her rest. After a massive feed provided to her by the workers, she got busy producing the next generation. Even as I rest, I can hear the workers scurrying about madly with fresh clutches of eggs, stashing them into the egg chambers, fastidiously cleaning them and ensuring they are the right temperature. This means I need to advance the schedule of my project even faster. For that though, I have to have cores. As I clack my mandibles in irritation, I'm suddenly distracted by a noise. Turning around, I see that it isn't Tiny snoring for once, though he is asleep, thick meaty arms flung over his face like a hairy teenager. The noise instead came from the pupa stashed with us in our private chamber. The cocoon has already begun to take on a distinct thin shade as the young larva inside has gone through its remarkable metamorphosis, transforming from a grub and into an ant. Still ghostly white and translucent as its carapace has yet to harden, the almost complete worker has started to slowly move, twitching at limbs and stretching out for the first time. I guess I'll help the little thing out. It is normal for other workers to assist newborns break free of their cocoon, cutting away at the threads with their mandibles. The very first workers in the colony will have this task performed for them by the queen herself. I think I can vaguely recall having to bite my own way out, but I don't really have any memory of my pupal stage. I really only became aware of myself after I had emerged. At any rate, I cheerfully help out the new member of our colony, my sibling no less, break out of the casing by chomping away at the outside carefully, removing sections of threads at a time and clearing the way for the hatchling to emerge. Gradually I see a little ant face poking out of the gaps, and after a few minutes the brand new worker stands proudly before atop its own casing. Small. Why the heck is this worker so small? She looks smaller than a normal hatchling by about a third, which makes her very tiny indeed. There is something else odd about her as well. I'm not sure exactly what it is. As a worker she seems a little energetic. She is practically bouncing around already, and she only just hatched. I remember as a grub this one had a lot of pep, but this seems ridiculous. Before I'm even finished internally complaining about this high-energy hatchling, she starts waggling her antennae around before locking onto me and rushing in my direction. In a few short moments she has raced across the ground and scrambled up onto my back before triumphantly positioning herself between my antennae and thwacking them insistently with her own. I hate thidoditis. Why the hell is this ant so attached to me? Why is it so different than the others? I honestly don't know what to make of this behavior. This worker is just so odd. Out of sheer curiosity I flip on my mana sense and extend my mind out of my body. There is a faint concentration of mana in a place that I did not expect. Right on top of my head. Are you kidding me, Gandalf? This little midget was born with a core. Tell me it isn't true. I struggled for that core, I worked hard for that rock. Now you're telling me that a monster ant can just flat out be born with a core. Tell me, swear on your pointy hat and rad staff with the shiny crystal on it that it isn't so. Despite my protests, my new passenger remained stubbornly clung to my head, core on board. Sigh. I will have to investigate this later. For now I poke Tiny awake and make my way out of the nest, Tiny hatchling excitedly riding on my scalp the entire way. Trying to put the distraction out of my mind, I try to turn my mind back to most pressing issue. Cores. Damn worker on my head. No. Don't get distracted. From what I know, a monster can form a core when they are sufficiently saturated with mana and then sacrifice an evolution in order to form it. How the freeloader on my scalp managed to get enough mana before she was even born, not to mention the evolutionary energy acquired by amassing levels. I'll have to put this exception to the rules to one side and focus on what I know. I myself increased my mana concentration by drinking mana-infused water, which, judging by how the monsters were addicted to that stuff, it isn't an unusual way for monsters to get that mana. So, if I can introduce a source of mana water to the farm, it might have an effect in increasing the number of monsters able to form a core. Worth a shot. Fortunately, I created the farm right next to a source of mana water. So convenient. When we return to the pond, I see a few branchies standing in small groups, but they quickly scatter and hide after we arrive. I swear there are a few new young trees growing near the edge of the pond. Have they been planting baby branchies here? I'll have to be careful not to disturb their local environment. For all I know, the branchies require this pond to sustain their lives. Better to be cautious. In the end, I excavate a shallow channel that leads to the farm tunnel, and I get Tiny to line the bottom with stones that he smashes flat. We then head down into the farm and disable all of the monsters before hollowing out a small pool directly under the tunnel entrance. Hopefully this works. Chapter 129, Transform and Roll. After digging our narrow channel to the farm tunnel, I get Tiny to place 2 large stones to act as the dam before we dig out the last of the soil and the water begins to flow. I notice a few branchies have poked their heads out of their trees, watching our activities. I think perhaps they may worried about us interfering with the pond. I try to give a reassuring wave of my antennae, but I'm not sure that will be enough to allay their fears. I guess we can only show that we mean no harm by executing the plan and letting them see how harmless it is. Workers have started coming over to the pond in the last few days in order to drink the mana water. With the farm nearby, it isn't surprising that the scouts have managed to forage their way over here. Naturally, once one ant finds something good, the rest will soon know about it. I was a little concerned that there might be conflict, but for the most part the ants have simply ignored any branchie they've found, probably not seeing much, if any, biomass in them. I'm quite excited though. This will help more workers form their cores, which will in turn cause them to grow even stronger when they evolve. When everything is in place, Tiny picks up our damming rock and the mana-infused water flows down our channel before eventually falling into our pre-dug basin within the farm. After a minute or so, Tiny drops the rock back into position with a splash and the water ceases to flow. The branchies, who had seemed a little alarmed when the water was flowing out of their pond, relax and move back towards their trees, quickly melding out of sight. I head straight over to the farm to see how the monsters within have reacted. Sure enough, those who have just spawned are immediately attracted to the water source. No water truce to be seen here though. They rapidly fight over it, shoveling the water into their mouths as quickly as they can. I retreat back up the tunnel. I'll lead the workers down to collect the biomass later. Hopefully we will have a core or two to show for our efforts. With this job done, it is time to turn my attention back to my new skill and its applications. After maxing out mana shaping, I gained mana transformation, the much anticipated and eagerly awaited skill. After reading the description and then slowly digesting the dump truck of knowledge and instincts the skill dropped in my brain, I've been gradually building an understanding of it. This skill will finally allow me to change the raw mana stored in my core into other, useful types, without relying on the shortcut of having an organ do the job for me. Only issue is, changing the mana into a specific type is painfully complicated. I'm still nibbling at the edges of what was placed in my brain. This skill was by far the biggest information overload I've had from a single purchase. If I were to use a metaphor, transforming mana into a specific type is like learning an instrument that is so intricate that it requires the use of both hands, both feet and your face to play it. From what I understand so far, you need to be shifting the mana in complex patterns through multiple dimensions in order for it to change. Dimensions. It only gets worse though. If you manage to master that obscenely complex instrument well enough that you can efficiently transform the mana into the required type and then use that mana to shape and fuel a spell, that is only for one type. If you want to transform your mana into another type, there is an entirely new fiendish instrument to learn, and this one requires you to play it with your butt cheeks as well. Not to mention, I've only been looking at the techniques required for relatively simple mana forms, like water or fire. When I tried to think about what I would need to do for space magic, I nearly passed out just thinking about it. This only reinforces my confidence that the gravity magic organ was a good choice. Not only is the complicated process of transformation handled for me, it is done well before any spell casting takes place. This also goes a long way to explaining why the magic organs are priced so highly. Getting a free choice just goes to show how potent the special evolutions really are. This all leads to the unfortunate reality of what I have to do next. To my mind, it is quite obvious what I have to focus my transformation learning on: mind magic. I need to be able to communicate just like Formo and the Sophos do. This will bridge the final hurdle in being able to universally speak to anything that I can come across if I'm able to pass my intentions on directly from mind to mind. Only problem is that mind magic is a fiendishly complex transformation. At least 3 or 4 times harder than doing something like fire. But it must be done. I have my gravity magic and a reasonably powerful physical body already, at least, powerful enough for the time being. Once I've achieved mastery of mind magic, I'll be able to focus my efforts unilaterally on pumping up my firepower. The other thing I need to do is spend some time on manipulating my cores and grinding levels in core engineering. An ant's work is never done. I'm excited though. Even if I'm not gaining levels, my strength is improving and I'm able to spend time on critical skills that I wasn't able to before. This will prepare me for the time Tiny and I descend into the dungeon once more to fight. We return to the nest, my impatient passenger included, and I spend time laboriously shifting values in my cores until I cannot force further changes before tossing them to Tiny to absorb. He's finally learned enough that I don't have to beat his head in before he realizes what he needs to do. Progress. After I've finished with one core and slump forward with mental exhaustion, the little hatchling on my head excitedly leaps forward to touch the core with her antennae. With a brief flash and a pop, the core vanishes into thin air. Oi. Who said that was yours? I use my antennae to give the worker a gentle thwack on the head, but she seems nonplussed, happily wiggling back and forth as she enjoys the sensation of her reinforced core. After a few moments, she happily climbs back up onto my head. I guess it doesn't matter that much. Since she was born with a core already, this one is probably worth spending the resources on to raise up strong. In fact, wouldn't she be able to perform a special evolution for her very first change? That is something even I wasn't able to do. Hardly my fault since I didn't know about it, but still, this little worker could end up being very strong if I invest some energy. Although this just increases the need for cores even further. Damn it. Since I'm exhausted anyway, I take Tiny back to the farm and we disable all of the monsters in there. I make sure to practice using my magic and fire off a number of gravity bolts, trying to increase my familiarity with the spell. This time, instead of taking our food and leaving, I tap the little ant on my head with an antennae to get her attention. Climb down off there and go finish some of the off. The workers seem to be able to understand the pheromone speak even if they can't speak it, so I'm assuming this one can too. Sure enough, after hopping back and forth indecisively, the little worker jumps off my head and savagely attacks with her tiny mandibles. Despite her enemy being a blade-tailed mouse that has been completely crippled, it takes almost a minute of biting before the poor creature finally falls still and the little ant poses victoriously atop her victim. Yes, very impressive. Now on to the next one. All in all, she is able to finish 3 monsters before tiring out. That much should be fine for a start. Her bite skill should have increased and at least 1 level, maybe 2 with that much experience. Next I flick on my mana sense and I am so pleased to see that there are 2 creatures with cores in here. 2. Compared to before, this is a massive increase. If I can get 2 cores a day, I'll be dancing with joy. The basin of mana water has decreased by about a quarter, so I may need to refill it in a few more days. Hopefully that won't strain the pond supply up there at all. If it does, we will have to pull back on the operation, but for now, cores ahoy. Filled with delight, I crunch those 2 monsters and dig out their cores before Tiny, The worker and I retreat back above ground to enjoy our feast as a team of workers advances into the farm to claim their experience and biomass. These few days have been so productive and peaceful, I'll have to enjoy it whilst I can. If my experience in this world has taught me anything, it's that the good times won't last. Minus 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 minus. And talk. There were a few questions in the comments after the last chapter where I referred to the little worker as she and a few comments about ant reproduction, so I'll get a little sciencey and answer them here. The author's notes section doesn't allow for long messages, so I'll pop my response here instead. Technically all of the workers in a colony are female. This includes Anthony. I didn't really want to make a big deal out of his gender, but I did want to be accurate, so I thought it would be funny if he only realized he had changed later on. His physical gender isn't going to be a big deal going forward in the story, but he will change it in the system if he gets a chance. For those worried that the story will turn into some kind of ant harem story, no need to worry on that front. He's into elves anyway. As for ant reproduction, male ants have wings, just like young queens. For a few weeks a year the queens and males will go on a nuptial flight where they meet up with queens and males from nearby colonies and mate with them. The males will then crawl off and die whilst the queens will land, rip off their own wings and dig a chamber for themselves to start their own new colony. For most species of ants, this is the only time the queen will mate in her life. The genetic material she collected on that one flight will last her entire life, which can be decades. The queen in our story doesn't need to mate at all, as she is instead a special monster spawned from the dungeon that is able to spawn new monsters in turn. Chapter 130 Whispers in the Dark. After spending time eating and attempting to train mana transformation, my small crew have a snooze and awake to work once more. Since we began napping in the afternoon, it's now solidly nighttime. The forest is beautiful and ethereal in the moonlight, only made slightly less so by the trails of monster ants wandering about. After assisting the colony farm once more and returning with another core, I decide it is time to pay a visit to the town from which we had rather spectacularly made our entrance to the surface world. I hope that guy whose arm I accidentally separated from his torso is doing well. I mean, life goes on with a single arm, right? Although we won't be able to see that much in the dark, I don't want to risk showing up in the day and potentially being spotted. It'll be best to minimize the potential for future limb removal type misunderstandings. As we travel, Tiny the little ant and I, no time is wasted as I practice my gravity spells as we travel. I might not be able to grind shaping levels anymore, but familiarity with the spell still counts, and casting on the move is so much harder than casting standing still. My magical skills grow with every passing day. Eventually we come to the edge of the forest and I ask Tiny to remain in the trees. His hulking form isn't suitable for slinking through the wheat fields and staying unnoticed. With my little passenger on board, I utilize my vaunted stealth techniques to creep through the farm fields towards to the buildings in the distance. When we arrive at the town, darkness has fallen over the land like a blanket. As we draw nearer to the town, however, I'm gratified to notice it is surprisingly well lit. Actually, it's strangely well lit. As in, what the hell is with this enormous fire? In front of the church a massive bonfire is blazing, surrounded by what appears to be a lively crowd of people. They are all holding crude weapons in hand, and even at this distance I can see that they seem possessed of a fierce energy. Relying on my impressive stealth, I creep closer until I'm less than 30 meters away from the edge of the buildings, and then I hunker down still to maximize the passive stealth bonus. In the dark, with my skills and nearly black carapace, I'm going to be almost impossible to spot, surely. I'll just have to keep my claws crossed they don't have monster detecting gems here. Actually, with their faces illuminated by the red glow of the crackling flames, pitchforks and rusty spears clutched tightly in their hands, they look a little demonic over there. Then I notice a voice rising above the background noise, filled with conviction and energy. Just in front of the church I spot my old pal the priest. At this distance it's a little hard to tell, but I think he's still wearing the same bloodied robes he was wearing when I first met him. He is standing in front of the church's main double doors, one good arm flung to the sky as he exhorts the people below. Every now and again his voice rises to soaring crescendo and the people shout and roar back to him, shaking their weapons and pumping their fists in the air. I mean, seems lively over there at least. Just, what the heck is going on over there? Then the doors are pulled open and a group of villagers emerge from within carrying something between them. The men approach the bonfire as the people fall silent and fall back out of their way. With a mighty heat they throw their burden onto the leaping flames and the crowd roars in approval as the fire roars and flickers. I'm pretty sure that was a monster corpse. It's nice that the village is safe and they are able to take care of themselves, but they seem a little too into it. Perhaps this is just a very civically minded town. Being able to defend themselves for now is nice and all, but my worry is that these people will end up taking on something they can't handle. If another Jellymo crawled up out of that hole in the ground, would these townspeople and farmers be able to handle that? Shouldn't there be some soldiery-looking types here by now? Dedication is all well and good, but do they really think a rusty pitchfork is going to do the job against the real dungeon monsters? Scanning the faces of the people, they all look determined and passionate. It seems like they are all in fending off the dungeon monsters, which seems fine, I guess. Towards the back I spy an older lady who doesn't look quite as pumped up as the rest. If I were to try and describe her expression, I would probably have to say concerned or worried. Her hands are tightly gripping her skirts and she stares down at the frenzied crowd. Perhaps she shares my concern that the townspeople may be getting a little ahead of themselves. Perhaps she isn't a bonfire person. At any rate, approaching a frenzied mob any closer than this doesn't seem advisable. Time to retreat. Just as I'm turning to leave, I notice that my head is feeling a bit breezy. Did someone open a window or something? Have I gone bald? I'm fairly certain I never had hair in the first place. Wait. Where is the little one? Using my antennae I slap my head and back before turning to scout through the surrounding wheat. Where the heck did that little scoundrel go? Panic is starting to rise in my chest. That is a promising young ant. Where the heck is she? The core. She has a core. Quick as a flash I flip on my mana sense and reach out with my mind, desperately seeking that tiny mana source. There it is. Threading its way between the wheat stalks I spot the little gem. The problem is that it's heading directly towards that roaring flame. What are you, a moth? You do not need to run towards any flame you see. Like a gazelle loose in the fields I spring after my curious sibling, all thought of minimizing noise lost. Even they spot me I can get away, but she'll be squashed for sure. She has managed to creep within just 10 meters of the people towards the back of the crowd. My heart is thudding with my chest. If they spot her, there could be serious trouble here tonight. It's one thing if they try and bash my head in. The little one is a different story. They'll cave her head in easily. And if that happened, I honestly don't know what I'd do. Come back here, you little troublemaker. I keep flicking my mana sense on and off so I can track the back and forth movements of the mischievous little ant. When I finally draw close enough, after what feels like years, I dive forward, 6 legs extended behind me and mandibles wide. I got ya. As gently as I can I snatch up the escaped worker in my mandibles, a situation she protests by wiggling fiercely. Stay still, you troublemaker. They'll kill you if they find you. Fortunately I can shout as much as I want in pheromone language. I don't make a sound. I quickly glance about. Hopefully we weren't noticed. Chapter 131 Flee from Fire. I'm almost so close to the back of the crowd I could reach out and poke a person with my antennae. Please let them not hear me. The little worker is still struggling in my mandibles, trying to get free to go and investigate the fire. What the heck are you so interested in? Is it the biomass? Are you just upset that they are burning the monster bodies and not eating that sweet biomass? I don't think they can eat that, kid. Different people have different cultures, okay? Stop your wiggling. I'll feed you when we get back to the colony, okay? Upon hearing that I'm prepared to feed it, the worker stops her escape attempts, causing my panic to subside a little. Then she happily clacks her mandibles, making an audible clack sound, causing my panic to skyrocket. At first there is no response, but then a middle-aged gentleman in the middle of the crowd slowly turns around, a frown creasing his forehead. His face goes completely white as he is met by the sight of a giant ant lying flat on its belly with another, smaller ant in its mandibles only a few meters from his back. Hi. I try waving to him with an antenna, but he flinches back from the movement, his mouth opening and closing in soundless panic. He reaches with shaking hands to tug on the clothes of the people around him and they turn, Irritated at first, but when they see his expression and he points with a trembling finger, they turn and behold my glorious backside as I have already begun to flee. Time to motor out of here. I can hear angry shouts behind me, followed by the soaring voice of the priest before the pounding of feet alert me to the movement of the people behind me. Turning my head slightly, I can see the crowd has recovered from their early shock and have started giving chase. Crude farming tools and rusty swords held at the ready. Holy smokes, Gandalf. These people are a little too into their monster killing. As I sprint through the fields with a horde of shouting humans behind me, the little worker is happily clicking and clacking her mandibles, thoroughly enjoying the ride. I'm speechless at her lack of awareness. Just whose fault do you think this situation is? Illuminated by burning torches, the crowd looks like an angry horde summoned from the depths of hell. Their raging eyes have become devoid of fear as they rush along in my wake. Ominate. I don't particularly want to kill my way through an entire village, but at the same time I don't want to lead them to the colony. Think, Anthony. I may just have to give them a taste of my magical prowess. Working quickly, I try to shape a gravity spear as I run. Being so distracted, I naturally lose a little speed as I stumble here and there, and the crowd begins to gain on me. It's okay, don't fail the construction. My practice has helped me become more familiar with the shape of the spell, like a tune that I've practiced more often. I still need to do a heap of practice before I can play it with total ease, but I can do it a heck of a lot better than I could the first time. After just 10 seconds of frantic mental work, I've prepared the spell and start pouring in the gravitational energy to charge it. In my haste, I don't properly control the flow of energy and pour in a ton too much, overcharging the spell. Gah! I don't have time to make another one, just fire it. Turning my head, I pick out my target, the first gentleman to notice me, no longer terrified but maniacally shouting. He leads the charge, what looks like a woodcutter's axe in his hand. Sorry, but you drew the short straw today. With a concerted though I fire of my gravity spear, the intricate dark purple construction streaks through the air like an arrow, piercing the man directly in the chest. Screams and shouts erupt from the crowd as the target falls to his knees, a disbelieving look on his face as his hands rise to try and grasp the ethereal spear emerging from his chest. Then they scream once more, their momentum completely broken, as the rings of light expand out in a flash, encompassing much of the crowd. Then the pulling force of gravity kicks in. At first they don't seem to notice, but the force grows stronger with each passing moment until they cannot resist it. At first they try and hold on, bracing their feet and leaning their bodies as if fighting against a strong breeze, but the potent pull cannot be denied, and eventually they all fall towards the bewildered gentleman whose chest still proudly sports the spear. Even I'm a little stunned at the potency of this spear and momentarily stop running to admire the sight of almost 50 people squashed together like sardines in a can. I can't even see the guy I target anymore, he's become buried under the bodies of his fellow townspeople. That isn't something I'm going to see every day. Muahaha. So long, suckers. With a jaunty wave of my antennae, I turn to dash away into the darkness. I'm not exactly sure what has happened in that village, but at the very least they are taking their community safety seriously. I'm still a little concerned that despite their committed attitude, eventually something too badass for them to handle will poke its head out of that hole and the people there will be food. I may have to advance some of my plans. Rushing back to the trees, we meet up with Tiny and I command the little worker to climb back up onto my head before we rush back to the nest in darkness. I've noticed that in the forest the monsters we encounter level up a little during the night time. I hadn't realized it at first since they still pathetically weak. In any case, we make it back home without any stress. Once we hit up the farm and ensure we've all had a good feed, leaving a heap disabled monsters for the colony and extracting another fresh core, I head back to my chamber and dig out my collection. The little one seems to have had enough excitement for the time being and decides to have a nap to help digest her meal. Once I've assembled my selection of treasures, I take all of the cores that are completely unmodified and place the Jellymo core to one side. I need to go through all of these cores and alter them as much as possible in my final push to level up core engineering. Summoning all of my intellect, I focus on the first core and begin the arduous process of making adjustments to the energies contained within. After several hours of mind-shattering work, it has been completed. I managed to take 5 cores and make all of the changes I can, successfully grinding out 2 more levels of core engineer. Arg. My head is thumping. Core engineering is ridiculously taxing on the mind, like shoving a boulder uphill using only your thoughts. I take 10 minutes in order to refresh myself and then bring myself to face the Jellymo core. I was super impressed with this monster when I fought against it, The terror it had managed to elicit, even from other monsters, was something I had never beheld before. Not to mention I suspect that this is a creature that has only evolved once, meaning that not much growth potential has been lost. Yes, I intend to make the Jellymo my second pet. Chapter 132 Crafting the Jellymo. If possible, I'd wanted to wait a little longer before reconstituting my second pet. With higher levels of core engineering, I'd be able to customize the creature to better fit the intended role I had in mind. Sadly, events are pressing me a little faster than I would have liked, and mining the cores in the farm has proven to be a little slow. If I had a month, then I could afford to wait, but I feel that things always accelerate faster than I want in this world. I mustn't forget that I still have to raise a reconstituted monster from an infant form up to the mature, combat-ready form it had when it was killed. That process will take a fair amount of time and has to be accounted for in my planning. If I'd had time, I would have been able to grind out a few more levels, and then, with my skills raised, I had hoped to embark on the kind of mastery that Formo had displayed to me. The Sophos have carved out a life for themselves within the dungeon using their hyper-modified and specially raised pets, showing just how strong this technique can be. I want to supplement my own strength with a few select pets also. I can't be in every place at once, and defending the colony whilst also hunting to raise my own strength is proving difficult. Eventually the colony will be strong enough to look after itself, with a number of more highly evolved workers and sheer numbers to overwhelm more powerful monsters. Until then, I want to be able to leave the colony for a stretch of time and be assured that it is well protected. The Jellymo is an incredible defensive creature. Within the confines of the dungeon, inside a narrow space, even without the power of sight, there is nowhere to hide from its fearsome tentacles and incredible strength. Imagining an enemy attempting to assault the anthill, sending soldiers down the main shafts to hunt the queen and ants huddling within, only to meet a wall of brutal tentacles that rip the flesh from their bones and devouring them whole. Yuck. Effective, but yuck. Okay. Bringing my antennae forward, I throw my mind into the dark gem resting on the soil before me. Immediately a flood of information invades my mind. All of the details of the Jellymo as a creature, its body type, organs, limbs, musculature, stats, and evolutionary pathway are laid bare in my eyes, ready for manipulation. The first thing that strikes me is the stats. I'm kind of surprised at how intelligent the monster is. I hadn't thought the creature would need much of a mind and had prepared myself for another all-brawn no-brain associate like Tiny. As I investigate deeper, it starts to make a bit of sense. By not included sensory organs, no eyes, sense of taste, smell or hearing, a tremendous amount of space was left available within the brain. It's a little hard to explain, but when I explore more deeply all of the things that contribute towards the final stat value, the intricacy and complexity of the system starts to become more apparent. So if there was only 10 points worth of energy available to devote to a monster's brain, then you would need to spend that developing all of the aspects of a brain for a rounded mind. Some of the energy would go to unconscious body management, like how a person doesn't have to think about making their heart beat. A good chunk of it would go on memory, more on increasing the speed and efficacy of the brain's connections, that is to say, intelligence. Since sensory organs are quite complex, the parts of the brain that deal with those are also quite complex, requiring a heap of energy to properly form them. By not including any of these, large amounts of energy was instead devoted towards pure intelligence and memory, gaining a relatively high cunning stat fairly cheaply. Interesting. Similarly, the Jellymo has no bones, much like a regular jellyfish. Without having to spend energy on a skeletal system, more was devoted to the powerful musculature. I'm still not exactly sure how the monster manages to function out of water without bones though. I'll need to dig a little deeper. The more I look, the more impressed I am with the way this creature is constructed. That incredible power has come about as a result of a series of trade-offs that have been made everywhere. Limited senses, no bones, reduced nervous system, very simple selection of organs, all cut back to produce that fiercest strength I'd been able to witness. However, this is still room for changes. Since the Jellymo already has greater than expected intelligence, I want to push that advantage a bit further. Intelligence will ultimately trump strength. The human race rising to supremacy on Earth is living proof. Besides, the Jellymo is already crazy strong. Any power I shave off now can be made up for in future evolutions by ensuring that the core is maxed out. I begin to put my mind to the changes, forcing and shaping them with my will and then holding them down until the new form holds steady within the core. Reducing the strength of the tentacles a little here and there, adjusting the musculature of the face to pour more energy into the brain. All of the extra energy is devoted to pure intelligence, raising the cunning little by little. I manage to squeeze another 4 points of intelligence before I stop. I don't want to take away the creature's strength too much. My mind is already aching by this point, the adjustments are becoming harder and harder to accomplish. I'm not sure how much more I'll be able to do. Girding myself, I dive deeper into the core, probing the limits of the information accessible to me at my current skill level. Ah! More answers are forthcoming here. It seems the creature's body manages without bones since its flesh is formed from a bizarre, rubbery substance that is partly infused with mana. If I'm reading this right, then the Jellymo won't be able to survive without a constant injection of mana since it will absorb it directly into its body. Crazy. I'll need to keep this in mind for future and make sure the little thing manages to get enough mana at all times. This may prove slightly tricky on the surface but won't be an issue in the dungeon. I can also see the future evolution paths of the Jellymo. There are a few selections but most of them are focused on providing various physical buffs and organs that directly increase overall combat proficiency. There is something else I want for my Jellymo. By scrapping most of the existing options, I create my own custom evolution, and in doing so I get to set the bonuses granted by choosing that evolution. Modifying a creature at this level is a first for me, and the change is excruciatingly hard to make. I feel as if I'm about to burst a vessel or completely pass out by the time it is finally done. That's it. I'm out, Gandalf. No more of this torture. I think that is all I can do. After taking a few minutes to recover, I reach forward to tap the core once more. Compatible monster core detected. Would you like to reinforce your core or reconstitute the monster? Reconstitute. With my command, the core begins to glow, emitting brighter and brighter light with each passing moment. As it grows more intense, the form of the core itself becomes more elastic, changing and shaping itself into the new monster. Eventually I have to turn my eyes away as the light has grown too radiant, casting shadows across the walls of our cozy chamber within the nest. Some eyelids would really come in handy right about now. Soon the light has faded and I turn back to behold my new creation and friend. It's a ball. Sitting on the ground in front of me in the space that the gem previously occupied is now a small dark sphere the size of a tennis ball. As I watch, tiny tentacles start to tentatively poke out of the ball, wiggling their way out to poke and stretch across the ground as the completely blind Jellymo tries to find something in its environment. Internally I sigh. I knew it was going to be like this, but somehow I hadn't quite mentally prepared myself for just how small and unthreatening the newly formed Jellymo would be. Don't be discouraged, me. Beat it up and it'll become the brutal killing machine you remember in no time. I'm over here, I tell the new monster and reach across with one of my legs to place it touching one of the seeking tentacles. The creature wobbles happily in response and reaching across with more tentacles to grasp my leg. It takes a few moments but eventually it manages to scale up onto my back, taking the position that Tiny once occupied when he was still small. Sheesh. I feel like I spent half my time giving rides to small creatures in this life. What am I, a pony? The dazzling display created by the core reconstitution has managed to awaken the little worker as well, and she rushes to take her place of pride on my noggin before we set out. I feel pleased but also exasperated. Fine. You can ride on my back for now, but you'll work hard once get large enough. Chapter 133. Digging is the song of my soul. With my new Jellymo pet, little worker, and Tiny in tow, I head over to the farm. I've occasionally been letting the workers into battle on their own, since I think every creature needs real combat experience rather than just raw XP. So long as they attack in numbers, the ants are able to quickly overwhelm their opposition, smashing the enemies and pulling them apart without any resistance. If they trickled in with smaller numbers, it would be a hugely different story. The weaker individual ants would get pulverized, so I only let them in after piling up enough workers at the entrance. As every day passes, the colony is growing stronger. Everywhere I look there are more workers with mutation advancements of all sorts, and when I flip on my mana sense there are the soft responses I get from low-level cores all over the place. Muahahaha. Our power grows. I believe I even spotted the first double-evolved worker, a beefy-looking ant with a larger head and powerful mandibles. This may be the first soldier in the colony. It's all looking good right now. Tiny and I descend into the farm chamber and smack the heck out of everything in there until they are almost dead. Only then do I let my two burdens loose on their meal. As the little worker excitedly leaps off to grab her experience, I take a moment to have a word with her. I'm not sure if you can understand this much, but try to spend your biomass on your pheromone gland. If you can get it to +5, you'll be able to take pheromone language and talk to me and the queen. Think about it. She looks back at me for a long moment before jumping onto her first victim and starting to saw away with her mandibles. I use one of my antennae to reach onto my back and poke the jellymo there. The jellymo has been sitting in the center of my back, tentacles expanded out to grip my carapace to stop the little ball from rolling straight off. When my antennae prods into its body, it reaches out with a tentacle and grabs onto it. "I'll take you to some food, grab on." The young monster grips onto my antennae and I lift it up into the air before heading over to a defenseless beast. I don't think the jellymo is able to fight at all yet, so I finish off the monster with a single chomp of my mandibles before dropping the little creature onto it. Like a small black tennis ball, the jellymo rests on the biomass, feeling it out with its tentacles before starting to eat. Once again I'm treated to the horrific sight of the main body somehow unfolding to reveal that dreadful maw filled with razor teeth. Only this time the entire process takes place in miniature. The fanged mouth is probably too small to fit in. Apple in at this point. Nonetheless, the newborn starts ripping into the biomass with gusto, taking in far more food than really seems physically possible until the main body has inflated from tennis ball size to nearly football size. Gross, but impressive. I nab some food as well. After this much time I've managed to accumulate a few biomass points. I'll need to think about what I want to prioritize my spending on soon. For now I gather my crew together and we exit the farm. Things are going well here with the colony. It's time to try and develop my own strength, and let Tiny exercise himself a little. The big guy is looking more depressed every day. If I don't let him fight something soon, I'm worried he's just going to fade away. We run about half the distance back to the village and I begin construction of a new tunnel. It's so easy to fall into the rhythm of digging. My inner ant is being nourished by the act of shifting dirt with my mandibles. It doesn't even take long until I've made significant progress. My powerful body combined with my digging skills is a powerful combination, not to mention the burning joy of my ant's soul towards the digging of tunnels. My aim is to connect a stealth tunnel to underneath the human church. There are a lot of reasons for this: a little bit of protecting the humans from the monsters further down the dungeon, preventing the humans from absorbing XP and wasting biomass, using the existing tunnel connections within the escape tunnel to push deeper into the dungeon to get some juicy monsters to fight in order to push Tiny and myself to the next level. Always scratching away at the back of my mind is the potential of the next evolution. After evolving into the mind ant, I've experienced a tremendous growth in power that I'm still working to explore. Since each subsequent evolution has seen an exponential amount of growth, and I have to admit to being super curious what will happen if I max out my core and evolve again. An ant can dream, damn it. After furiously digging for half a day, I eventually convinced Tiny to help me out by telling him I'm trying to get him something to fight. To my surprise, he willingly throws himself down the tunnel and starts tearing into the ground with his hands, pausing every few minutes to haul up armloads of dirt to dump on the forest floor before charging underground again like a deranged miner. It almost brings a tear to my eye to see him so active again. Welcome back, Tiny. Whilst he's digging, I make a quick trip back to the colony to help them harvest the farm and feed the two children who are still using me as their own personal transport. The faster I feed you little runts, the faster you'll grow up and prove yourselves useful. Eat well. Muhahaha. After seeing to my duties, I rush back to relieve Tiny of his digging duties and press onwards with the project. We don't have time to waste right now. The foreboding feeling that started rising in me yesterday has only continued to rise. This is another thing driving my desire to get back into the dungeon and level up. After digging down and angling the tunnel, I rely on my tunnel map to guide our fledgling tunnel to connect with the escape tunnel far enough down that we shouldn't have any risk of being heard or observed by the humans battling the monsters in the church. After another 4 hours of solid earth chomping, we finally break through. Time for fighting. Chapter 134. Once more into the breach. It is a known phenomenon that not all monsters of the same species are created equal. From as far back as the Rending, when monsters had first appeared on the surface of Pangera, it had been noted that some monsters boasted far more individual strength than others of the same kind. The difference was so pronounced it could not be explained by a simple difference of levels. Indeed, over the centuries, as all the sentient species of the surface delved into the dungeon, eager to unlock its mysteries, it was discovered that some monsters are simply spawned stronger than others. Faster, more powerful, more intelligent, and altogether more deadly. When these monsters reached maturity, they typically were able to display a leadership-type quality amongst other monsters of their own kind, gathering together bands of followers, groups of monsters that grew in power rapidly due to the leadership and guidance they received. It is generally accepted that this is the reason such monsters came to be known amongst scholars as champions. Mercenaries and freelance explorers were more crude and direct with their naming. Out of fear these elite monsters caused in them as well as the strength they displayed, the common name for such monsters became brutes. It isn't known why such monsters spawn, or how. They appear infrequently in normal times, but numerous studies suggest that in times of great conflict or upheaval in the dungeon the spawn rate of champions rises tremendously. Some have claimed that champion monsters can grow so powerful as to exert their controlling influence over monsters not of their own kind, forming armies of mixed monsters in the depths that rampage endlessly until they burn themselves out in endless conflict, or settle down and go into hiding. Such claims are often rebuffed, as little evidence of such has reached the surface in the time of writing. Excerpt from Chapter 4, Dungeon Champions, from the Dungeon Monsters, a primer by Hedger Oldfinger. Minus 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 After breaking down the final bit of dirt, the now familiar glow of the dungeon assaults my eyes. The screaming of the monsters, the sound of claws tearing at flesh and pulse running through the mana veins on the walls, like the pulse of the very planet itself. I almost missed this. Not quite, but almost. Tiny certainly did though. Crouching in the narrow tunnel behind, the sounds of vicious combat are like music in the ears of the ape. In an incredibly short amount of time he can no longer contain himself and shoves me forward out of the way, leaping into the dungeon with a bloodthirsty roar. Tiny is back in town. I, however, am crumpled on the floor with a rather heavy ape standing on my back. "Get off me, you goon!" I shout. I don't think he hears me, or if he does, he clearly chooses to ignore me. Screeching with rage, the giant ape hurls himself onto the centipedes, hounds, lizards and rabbits in his path, fists blazing with electricity. We are not significantly deeper into the dungeon here than the farm is, but I can already see that the monsters spawning here are visibly more powerful, with some of the more dominant low-level monsters appearing. Even this little upgrade is enough to pump Tiny's blood and wake his thirst for battle. As the giant ape leaps into action, the enemies rapidly crumple one by one as they are unable to resist those potent fists. Body after body is being blasted into the walls or smashed into the floor, never to rise again. Hold on. Leave some for me. I scramble to get my feet under me and hurl myself into the fight. 10 minutes later, we have cut down everything in our way in this section of tunnel and have settled down to munch on some biomass. "You happy now, Tiny? You got have a decent fight finally," I say to my gorging pet. He doesn't even pause his eating, but a frown creases his bat forehead as he ponders my question, turning the words over in his mind. "No," he replies. "I'd figured as much. Although it was a little tougher than the farm, it simply isn't enough to satisfy the big guy. That's okay though. We'll keep digging deeper until we find something and start to level up once more." Speaking of levels, I actually gained one in this fight. Nobody was as surprised as me to finally get my level up from killing a thorn lizard, but hey, there it is. The little worker and Jellymo have also leapt off their transportation, me, to stuff themselves once more, packing their miniature bodies with absurd amounts of food. I really have to name these two. Thinking of them as little worker and Jellymo is starting to feel a little rude. Surely a bit more consideration wouldn't hurt, right? The worker is small and hyperactive, full of energy and a complete pain in the gaster. Her name should represent her curious and exhausting self. I'll call her Vibrant. I'm not sure why, but the name just speaks to me. Satisfied, I turn my attention to the ball of magical black rubber that is busy feeling its way around with small tentacles, trying to locate the next mouthful. So far the young Jellymo has been fairly quiet. Mind you, I'm not sure if she can even talk back to me at this stage of her development. I don't have too much to go on. Also, should I give a boy or girl name? Tiny is fairly gender neutral. Maybe I should go down that road again. What sort of name would fit a blind, tentacle monster of endless doom though? I'm fairly stumped. I may just have to pick something think sounds fitting and not worry too much about the meaning. Chrysalis. Sure, why not? Sounds sort of Latin-y, like most of the monster species names. I'll roll with it. I'm not the sort to put too much thought into these things. We find 3 cores amongst the remains and I take 2, leaving 1 for Tiny to absorb. I make sure to give him a hard stare until he does, in fact, absorb the thing. He knows what'll happen if he doesn't. Although it would have been troublesome, I could have taken these cores to the surface for skill grinding, but I decided to straight up absorb them and return to the path of powering up my core. It feels nice to once again be on the path of strengthening oneself. As we rummage around in what used to be the tail end of the escape tunnel, I make something of a discovery. It appears as if the loosely packed soil the colony had left behind was not enough of a deterrent to the dungeon veins, and they had remained inside the dirt we had left behind. It may have been spawning the odd monster inside the earth, or something may have followed the trail of veins and dug its way through, but certainly something has followed from below. Right at the end of the old escape tunnel I find a hole that opens into a narrow passage that retraces the colony's steps back into the depths of the dungeon. Nards. I was afraid of something like this. This means the human church isn't only exposed to the small monster-producing space we left behind but is potentially connected to the entire dungeon. Tiny. Chrysalis. We have to get moving. It's time to explore a little deeper. Tiny is visibly pleased with the news, but I don't get a response from the small blob. Oh right, I didn't tell it what its name was. I walk over to it and tap it with one leg. Climb on up. From now on your name will be Chrysalis. Pleased to have you on the team. The little ball wobbles with what I think might be joy before latching onto my leg and climbing up onto my back. Once Chrysalis is securely positioned, I go to collect the little worker. From now on your name is Vibrant. Make sure to get the pheromone language mutation and then we can chat. Let's go. Vibrant twitches back and forth with nervous energy as her eyes focus on me for a long moment, then she leaps up into her normal position and we descend further into the dungeon. Chapter 135 Rising. We venture forth, squeezing into the narrow tunnel and descending into the depths. Every now and again I can detect a monster forming, and this prevents us being ambushed as we pick our way down. I've managed to pile up a healthy amount of biomass over the last while and none of it has been spent. While I wasn't paying attention, it stacked up to 21. This was unheard of wealth when I was just starting out, completely ridiculous. Now, I've managed to not even realize I had so much as I devoted all of my attention and energy on my skills. With this much I can purchase the +6, +7 and +8 upgrades for a single organ, but which to pick? I could go the new hotness of the gravitational organ or the old reliable of the infused mandibles, even hark all the way back to the eyes. I think I'll go something that is directly combat relevant and upgrade my mandibles to +8. I don't want to run into anything else I can't tear through with my trusty face scissors. Combined with the power of my shattering bite skill, this upgrade could have a powerful effect. Do you wish to improve mandibles to +8? This will cost 21 biomass. Go for it. Oh god. My face. My precious face. Once again the horror of the mutation itch has somehow slipped my mind completely and has stormed back to remind me just how mind-meltingly irritating it really is. My face is on fire. Fire, I say. There was a distinct leap in the level of itch from +4 to +5, but I had assumed that was largely because of the mutation advancement. Apparently not. Eventually the feeling fades and I came back to my senses. Tiny is impatiently standing behind me whilst I have been wibbling about the place, madly scratching at my face. Don't look at me like that, you lousy ape. Why is it I never see you scratching away yourself when you mutate? I'm going to try and keep a closer eye on these pets of mine and see if I can spot them having trouble as they upgrade themselves. To help them? Of course not. I shall point and laugh. Let's see the look on your face then, Tiny. Having recovered, we continue on our way down the tunnel and we come to the section of tunnel where we had connected to an existing section of dungeon in order to hunt and feed the colony. Here the trail stops. It looks like whatever had drilled out the old escape tunnel had started from here and not from the old nest. Thank goodness. If those horrific beasts I had heard but not seen had followed us all the way up here, we would have had some serious problems, not to mention the human town would have been in some strife. This is by far the better outcome. This time I make sure to leap into the active dungeon tunnel before Tiny can lose his patience and shove me down. What greets my eyes is the same bustling scene from the first time we invaded this place. Low-level dungeon monsters fighting each other furiously in 2s and 3s up and down the tunnel, fallen monsters on the ground being contested fiercely as creatures try to heal and sustain themselves through the endless fighting. Get 'em, Tiny. This tunnel is barely large enough for the big ape to move comfortably, being the kind of smaller offshoot tunnel that I had been born in rather than a main thoroughfare. He makes the best of it though and gleefully starts smashing his way down the tunnel whilst I follow along with my passengers aboard. Whenever a monster from behind us tries to attack, I subdue it with a quick blast from the business district. The unfortunate target is quickly set upon by nearby creatures as its movement becomes restricted and the acid begins to eat away at its health. My goal is to try and find a larger, main tunnel. The monsters we find there should be more on our level and provide a larger boost to our growth. If I'm lucky, we might even harvest a decent number of cores from such a location. With Tiny in front, we follow the twists and turns of the tunnel for 30 minutes, punching our way through every step of the way, before we come to what it is I've been looking for. Ahead of us, the smaller tunnel suddenly opens wide into a much larger passage. The sound of fighting and the roar of monsters is our welcome. Perfect. Before us there is a rolling brawl of the sorts of monsters we had become accustomed to seeing in the forest. Bear tyrants, lion ogres, wolf dragons and others that I've never seen before. Armored lizards the size of horses with mighty club-like tails and 2 heads are facing off against huge creatures with snake-like tails that lead to an upright body festooned with claws and spikes that they whip about with blinding speed. Tiny has become very still for some reason. I shuffle forward a little so I get a good look at his face. "You okay there, buddy?" His face has gone completely slack as his eyes drink in the scenes of glorious carnage before him as if he were dying of thirst and staring at the freshest of pure mountain streams. The infatuation, the adoration in those eyes. He looks like a giant bat-faced ape in love. Are you that desperate to fight things? Really? Fine. You stand there and take in the sights. I'll jump in and steal your XP. Bwahahaha. With my 2 passengers clutching on tightly, I leap down into the main tunnel, mandibles ablaze with energy as I channel mana into them. Shattering bite. The illusory jaws of energy extend from my mandibles and crunch down on the nearest monster who, refreshingly, doesn't collapse from the first attack. The blood is starting to pump through my body as the excitement rises in my chest. Finally a good battle. I can stretch out and move at last. I can test out my new techniques. As I feint forward and back against my opponent, a battered tyrant bear who rumbles and slashes at the air in response to my provocation, bearing its tremendous fangs, I begin to craft my new magic within myself. I hope you're ready for some of this flavor. Taste my gravity bolt. My practice has certainly paid off. It only takes me a few seconds to shape the magic and pump it full of energy until it is ready to launch. I lunge to one side, causing the bear to rear back out of my range as it prepares a retaliatory attack. At this precise moment I fire the gravity bolt. The foe has no time to react before the spell impacts it in the side, right on target. Immediately the magic takes effect and starts to drag the bear down. Ugh. I'm impressed though. The raw physical strength of this monster has allowed it to remain on its feet as opposed to being pressed flat against the ground like the weaker beasts I'd practiced on. The powerful gravity is still having an effect, however. The bear is using so much strength to battle against the pull, its legs are practically shaking. Its eyes are still fierce, but a tinge of fear is there for the first time. How are young to fight in that sort of condition, Mr. Bear? You can't. Shattering bite. Trying not to get cocky, I keep an eye on my surroundings as I circle around the bear and begin my assault on its tremendous defenses. In order to puncture that insanely tough hide, I need to close the distance and use my physical mandibles. This is made fairly trivially easy, however, since I am quite nimble, but the bear is struggling to turn and keep me in its eyes. Shattering bite. Shattering bite. More mana into the mandibles. Shattering bite. You have slain level 8 Earth Bear Tyrant. You have gained experience. Behold my power. As I'm glorying in my triumph, a shattering screech echoes down the tunnel. Tiny is ready to fight. Chapter 136 Brolin. The ear-shattering screech out of Tiny has only gotten stronger over time. As the sonic waves roll over my precious ear canals, the stunning effect slams into my soft brain like a sledgehammer. Thanks to my sturdy willpower, I can shake it off after a second and see how the rest of the monsters are doing. Generally, not great. There are plenty of beasts reeling or stunned completely from that vocal blast, whilst a few larger creatures seem to have managed to resist largely as well as I did. Having announced his mighty presence, Tiny leaps down into the cavern, the rocks cracking under him when he lands with a boom. The long hair on his arms and back is slowly starting to rise into the air as he glares hungrily at the monsters before him, who can only shrink back from this intimidating beast. I can only imagine that seeing such a beefy, strong-looking monster land in their midst is not exactly what they had expected or hoped for. Tiny's hands and body are starting to spark in earnest now, little zaps of electricity rippling over his body and swimming across his fingers. Roar. Not intimidated by the fearsome display, one of the armored lizards bellows a challenge from across the tunnel. Tiny's bat ears twitch in outrage and he screeches back, the sonic blast physically impacting some smaller monsters and knocking them right off their feet. Crunch. Crunch. As the two monsters stomp towards each other, their heavy tread shatters the stones beneath their feet. Not willing to be caught in the fray, the smaller monsters back the hell up, desperate to get out of the way of what is about to take place. Even I can follow their logic. If these two big fellas want to fight each other, that is a hell of a lot better than them picking on us. Let's move to the side and eat each other whilst they do their thing. I have to admit I feel like a proud dad as I watch my once little ape stomp towards a fiendish armor beast in preparation for a no-holds-barred battle to the death. Should I cast a sneaky gravity bolt in there to help Tiny out? Aside from the risk of hitting my own pet accidentally, I'm not sure he'd be okay with me interfering in his long-awaited battle. I might just have to keep an eye on things and play it by ear. As they two monsters draw closer to each the other, the pressure in the air increases to unbearable levels. Two monsters enter. Only one will leave. Suddenly swinging his fists in wide arcs, Tiny is the first to act. Electricity crackles in the air as he raises both massive hands in the air before leaping forward and crashing them down like a thunderbolt. Reading his move, the massive lizard dives forward fearlessly. By shifting the point of impact in this way, the blow will fall on its back where thick bony plates will absorb the damage, rather than straight onto its head. Crash. The feet of the lizard are forced 3 inches into the cavern floor as that titanic blow, with all the weight of an angry bat ape behind it, shudders through its body. It isn't the physical damage that troubles the beast though. Bright rippling arcs of electricity discharge from Tiny's fists as they impact, piercing straight through that hard shell to roast the tender flesh beneath. Gasp. Is this the legendary ape thunder strike? As I'm absorbed by watching this clash, I manage to notice something in my peripheral vision. A second of the large shell lizards is positioning itself for a charge to one side. Clearly the monster is planning to intrude on what is clearly a thrilling 1-versus-1 battle. How rude. Sneakily I begin to prepare a spell. Let's see how you like this tasty little dish. After being damaged by Tiny's strike, the lizard shakes itself vigorously before turning its large body with deceptive speed. The clubbed tail behind it whips through the air so quickly it almost can't be followed by the eye. Look out, Tiny. The big ape appears to see it all coming, hardly needing any warning from me. He rotates his body and flashes out a clean right hook, connecting flush with that bony tail and smashes it away. Holy hell. That was so fast. Punching in such a way isn't without cost, however. A clear crunching sound can be heard from Tiny's fist in the moment of impact. He must have broken at least some fingers. With his back turned, however, the interloping lizard has found its moment to charge. Unleashing a furious roar, it pounds the rocky floor with its mighty 4-legged tread, its incredible mass and hard armor shattering any stone pillars or monsters unfortunate enough to be in the way. Ah. I've been waiting for you, my friend. I skitter forward until I am facing down the rampaging monster who clearly intends to crush this pitiful ant flat on its way to assist in taking down the fearsome gorilla monster. If only it were that easy for you, big guy. Try this dish. The inverse gravity bolt. With malicious glee I release the powerful blast of purple magic that shoots through the air like a bullet. With its large frame and momentum, the lizard has no chance of dodging my strike and can only choose to continue head-on. I can almost see the flicker of surprise in the beast's eyes as my spell impacts, and it feels no pain at all. Did the spell have no effect? In fact, not only did it not hurt, my body feels lighter than ever. I feel like I'm flying. Hew. You sure are, buddy. Confused growls followed by panicked squeals erupt from the beast as it realizes that it is rising from the floor, and instead of smashing me to pieces with an irresistible charge, it has sailed gracefully over my head, legs waggling in the empty air. As its forward momentum peters out, the poor monster is left hovering in mid-air close to the ceiling, legs and tail whipping about as it tries to control its body and move the way it wants to. Not to worry, big guy. You'll be coming down sooner than you think. As I prepare another spell, Tiny has pivoted back to his foe and swung out with his fists once more, smashes the lizard so hard he knocks it several feet to one side, unleashing another charge of electricity as he does so. Once again the scent of roasted flesh fills the air as the lizard roars in pain, unable to resist this fierce elemental damage. Then its eyes fiercely glow and it unleashes something I didn't expect. From the floor of the cavern the rock suddenly becomes soft for a moment before reforming into a sharp lance that pierces through the air like the fierce thrust of a spear. Unable to predict the stealthy attack from below, Tiny is caught unawares. Unable to dodge the spear in time, it pierces him in the side. He manages to catch the tip in one hand, preventing the stone spike from penetrating any deeper as it continues to extend, lifting the massive ape from the ground. Earth magic. I hadn't expected that. These monsters must be double evolved to be able to use something nifty like that, surely. My eyes light up with greed at the thought of the XP and biomass to be harvested from battling against monsters as evolved as I am for a change. Tiny seems to think the same as me. Far from panicking at being wounded, his fangs are revealed in a manic grin, his eyes wide open and blazing with hunger. He looks even fiercer than before, to be honest. Still holding on to the spear with one hand, Tiny bellows and clutches the other fist before his face. Instantly dazzling blue electricity begins coursing through his body and concentrating on that fist. I know what this is. I manage to turn my head away just in time as Tiny thrusts his hand forward, discharging a blinding arc of lightning at his foe. This time he doesn't cut it off after one blast, however, and I turn my head back, expecting the attack to end, but instead get an eyeful of blazing lightning as Tiny continues to channel it through his hand, electricity pouring out from all over his body and rushing to his hand in unending streams. Under this ferocious attack the lizard cannot maintain control over its magic and the spear of stone crumbles to nothing as Tiny continues his electric assault. Actually, isn't it about time? Glancing up towards the roof, I think my floating friend is just about to run out of charge. My sense of timing is close to spot on as the beast roars in triumph. The sensation of floating has started to fade. Soon it will drop back to the floor. Oh, you'll fall back to the floor all right. Gravity bolt. Chapter 137. The beating goes on. Impacted by the second gravity bolt, the poor lizard experiences a brief moment of suspension. A narrow window of time in which the effect of the upwards gravity is fading and the new downward force is only beginning to kick in. The tentative balance is suddenly broken and with sensational effect. From hovering in place like an awkward levitating turtle, the monster suddenly descends so quickly my eyes almost cannot catch its motion. Boom. A tremendous impact occurs, sending dust and debris flying into the air, obscuring my vision and showering the cavern with shards of rock. Holy moly. I didn't expect that to happen. Well, not quite so spectacularly at least. Scurrying quickly, I use my antennae to swipe at the air and try to clear my view and inspect my prey. Eventually I have to stop in place as I feel I may have walked too far. Where the heck is it? Is this dust ever going to settle? On my back the two interlopers are just as blind as I am, although, for RinoZ, it is a fairly standard state of affairs. Turning on the spot, it takes a moment for me to realize the texture of the floor beneath my feet is slightly different. Looking down, I notice that I'm standing on the back of the monster. It's been squished right into the floor. Slowly the dust falls to reveal that the lizard has been completely submerged in the rocky floor of the cavern by the impact, and somewhat lacking at tact, I've wandered directly onto its back. Even worse, the monster is still alive, groaning painfully as the downward pressure continues to compact it straight into the ground. Sorry about that, buddy. I'll ease your suffering. Piercing chomp. Crunch. Phew, this shell is seriously tough. Piercing chomp. Crunch. Still not there. Again. 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 By the time I finally break through those tough armor plates, my face is feeling extremely sore and I've managed to level up my piercing bite once. No wonder Tiny was struggling to crack it with his hands. Even using my armor-penetrating skill, it took almost 20 strikes. You have slain level 12 OS Laser Tie. You have gained experience. Feel my wrath, you dinosaur wannabe. Mooyah ha ha ha. Vibrant seems somewhat confused by my domineering victory pose. Her antennae are wibbling about in a confused manner until she eventually decides to somewhat copy my dynamic stance, one leg raised to punch the air. Don't copy that. For starters, you didn't even do anything. Second, you're making me feel childish in my moment of victory. This battle was the first in which my incredible magical superiority played the decisive factor. Allow me my moment of pride, damn it. Meanwhile, Tiny has also completed his battle. After sustaining his brutal lightning attack until the enemy was almost completely roasted, he then approached his incapacitated foe and punched its head in. Instead of expressing his dominance to other monsters by posing coolly, Tiny instead approaches his defeated foe and immediately starts ripping into the biomass, tearing it apart with his bare hands and shoving it into his face. You know, looking at the response of the other monsters in the chamber, his method may be more effective in the intimidation department, but it lacks style. Indeed, the other monsters in this section of tunnel are giving both Tiny and myself a large berth as they continue to battle amongst themselves. Incredibly, I actually see a few of the normally battle-crazed beasts slinking off down the tunnel, disengaging from fighting entirely. Is it just me, or are some of these creatures getting smarter? In the early days of the wave, they would hurl themselves into bloody slaughter the moment they were created and clawed out of the dirt, regardless of the odds. I couldn't possibly imagine for a second one of those creatures would voluntarily escape from battle. Calculating the odds just wasn't something they seemed capable of. Now though, it looks a little different. Between a monster who can decide if a fight is too dangerous and tactfully retreat, or a monster who suicidally charges forward no matter what, which is more dangerous? In the short term, the suicidal monster is a little dangerous. In the long term, the sneaky one is by far the greater threat. In this world, the potential for growth of monsters seems nearly infinite. All we need is time and resources. For a monster, surviving to fight another day is the only thing that matters. I'll have to think about this development later. For now, the stupid monsters who decided to stick around shall become my food. Tiny finishes crunching on his biomass and then turns his greedy eyes towards the other monsters battling on the fringes of the cavern. None shall be let go. The two of us catapult forward to continue the battle once more. Having discharged most of his electricity, Tiny is reduced to smashing his opponents with just his raw strength, whereas I have plenty of juice left in the tank. Instead of just chomping everything to death, I try and work on some new tactics. The gravity bolt combo I used on the lizard is just one of my new strategies. I have other ideas as well. The first is to test the gravity spear in combat situations. After launching a spear towards a cluster of monsters, the pulling effect is strong enough that none of them are able to escape, instead being sucked into a comical ball of writhing monsters who stab and snap at each other viciously with no way to escape. Gita. Now is the time to apply some damage. Shattering bite. Crunch. Pouring forth my stamina, I manifest the two ethereal mandibles around the condensed monsters and savagely bite, crushing the creatures between them. You have slain. You have slain. You have slain. It's so easy it almost feels mean. This is the strength of the mind dance. Being able to wield these powerful spells and destroy my opponents with ease. It was for this sort of effect that I've been striving from the very beginning, practicing my magic skills and prioritizing the growth of my core, grinding away all of those hours and finally choosing this evolution, sacrificing strength, sacrificing toughness, all to boost my capacity to wield magic in this new world. All of it was for this. And it was totally worth it. I start to run around the cavern, gleefully hurling a new gravity spear every time I form one and running towards the hapless targets to crunch them with my mandibles. Even as my flagrant use of my own stamina and mana mounts up and exhaustion sets in, I don't stop until every monster I can see has been defeated. So much fun. I even went up a level. This trip into the dungeon has certainly been profitable. Being able to cast my spells so smoothly in combat feels so rewarding. I still feel it's possible to bring them out faster, but I'll need a lot of practice to make that happen. I also shouldn't overestimate my strength either. There will surely be some forms of counter to magical attacks, shields of some sort, or magic dampening abilities. Just because I can beat up on these small fry doesn't mean I should start celebrating too much. Keep it cool, Anthony. With the main bulk of our work complete, we try and wrap up the rest of our task as quickly as possible. I get Tiny to help me locate any cores we find, and I get him to hold on to them for me before we settle down to have a rapid meal. The two lizards we defeated are undoubtedly the strongest monsters we fought here, so they are the biomass of choice. You have consumed a new source of biomass, OS Lacerti. You are awarded 1 biomass. Basic profile of the OS Lacerti unlocked. OS Lacerti, Bone Lizard. This monster is famed for the powerful armor covering its body, its immense physical strength, and the devastating power of the clubbed tail. Although not too powerful, the beast is capable of simple earth magic spells. Be careful. Yeah, now they tell us. Drained but satisfied, Tiny, myself, Vibrant and Chrysalis tuck into the biomass enthusiastically. I personally managed to pick up another 9 points. Chapter 138 Family. Overall, we managed to harvest 6 cores from the wide section of tunnel, including 2 tasty-looking ones from the bone lizards. All in all, this has been an extremely profitable trip. It feels good to get levels and biomass again so freely like this. Now that I don't have to worry so much about the colony surviving the terror of the wave, I'll be able to head down here with Tiny every now and again in order to make sure my personal strength isn't lagging too far behind. I can already feel more heat readings from the walls growing with every passing second. A new wave of monsters is about to spawn and I'd rather not get tangled up with them. I collect my passengers and tell Tiny that it's time to leave. The big ape has mostly healed up after consuming all of that biomass, but his fist still looks like it's in rough shape. Not too surprising considering what he punched. More importantly, he looks relaxed and happy, something I haven't seen for over a week now. Being a little careful with ourselves, we begin the long trek to the surface one more, clearing out the monsters who had spawned behind us as we descended. The two little ones are probably the members who gained the most from this trip. I'm not sure that eating more advanced biomass expedites the growth of young monsters, but it probably does. I'll be interested to see how much Chrysalis has grown tomorrow. Since Vibrant is a fully grown monster, albeit a small one, she will have gained a truckload of biomass from consuming a creature 2 evolution levels above her, perhaps as many as 15 points. Considering how limited her stomach capacity is, getting so many points from one meal is quite an amazing haul. Eventually we make our way back to the surface. I climb out first in order to detect if there are any humans or other creatures around the opening to the tunnel. We need to be somewhat careful moving in and out of here as we aren't too far from the human settlement. Some caution goes a long way in avoiding unnecessary complications. Since we've cleaned out the lower tunnels twice, there shouldn't be too much there for the humans in the church to fight, just the very weakest monsters who spawned above where my new tunnel connects to the old one. Not only have I protected their lives, I've also robbed them of experience. Truly giving with hand and taking with the other. Ugh. To be honest, I haven't hurt them at all, and taking little steps like this to protect my colony, my family, is surely permissible, right? Gandalf. My conscience is clean. The 4 of us begin the long trek back into the forest. Well, 2 of us begin the long trek back into the forest. I'm fairly certain that Vibrant has fallen asleep on my head. Judging by the rhythmic expansion and contraction of the little ball on my back, Chrysalis has also. Why iota? Oh fine. They've had a big day, I suppose. The faster they digest that biomass and grow, the sooner they'll be off my back and working hard for the colony. Just you wait, you little freeloaders. It takes a few hours to walk back to the anthill and things are perfectly peaceful on the journey. However, when we are almost there, faint sounds of battle attract my attention. My heart slows in my chest as I recognize the sound of human voices shouting and the clash of steel. People are fighting near the colony. Immediately I start sprinting forward at top speed, not caring that my rapid movement has jolted my 2 passengers awake. Tiny seems to detect my rising panic and rumbles after me as quickly as his long arms reach out and seize the ground. With every step my heart is pounding and a scream is rising in my head. Not my family. Not my family. Not my family. Not again. The sickening sounds of weapons crunching through monster flesh are enough to bring tears to my eyes. I mean, if I had tear ducts. Just let my colony be safe. In a few moments that felt like hours, we finally burst onto the scene. The anthill rises like small mountain to my right, dominating the center of the clearing. Workers pour out of the top, mandibles clacking with rage, antennae twitching angrily, no doubt sensing the call to arms pheromones that have summoned the workforce to battle. To my left are 10 humans, each equipped with glittering weapons and armor, intricately adorned with insignia and embossed filigree. 2 mages stand at the back, ornate staves in their hands and flowing robes running over their shoulders. These are some of the most elaborately equipped humans I've ever seen. And they are massacring the ants. The workers swarm forward mindlessly, desperate to defend their home, but they cannot get close enough. The magicians have conjured some type of shield that pushes the workers back, allowing the warriors to swing freely and unleash their sword skills, sending waves of sword light slashing through the ants. The acid fired from above is likewise blocked by magical means, scattering harmlessly and running down the invisible barrier. In the center of my view is the most horrifying sight of all. The queen has come out. Her huge frame is shuddering with rage as she tries to heal her children and push forward to rend her enemies at the same time. My family is dying. Tiny. Kill. I'm barely coherent enough to roar these words to my companion before my mind goes totally red. My precious siblings are being killed, torn apart like paper, right before my eyes. I have to save them. In one movement I vigorously shake off the 2 little ones and start sprinting at the enemy. They dare to attack my family. I'll bite them to pieces. Blinded by rage, I act without any sort of plan, rushing directly forwards. Closer, closer, closer. When I'm just a few meters away, one of the spellcasters turns his head and almost contemptuously flicks his wrist towards me. Immediately I feel an impact on my face, as if an invisible barrier just rushed at me, trying to bounce me away. Not today, Mr. Mime. I dig in with my claws and crunch down with my mandibles, trying to rip this wall to pieces with sheer physical force. At the same time, the blow to my head has returned some of my senses. Charging blindly into an unknown force may not be the best idea, Anthony, but if it saves the ants, it'll be worth it. Even as I wrestle with this barrier, I engage my sub-brain to begin construction of a gravity spear. If any one spell is going to disrupt their formation, this'll be it. The mage seems a little confused at first by my stubborn resistance to his spell, somewhat surprised that I wasn't simply knocked back, possibly even killed by the impact of the barrier. I glare at him as he studies me a little more close, taking in my advanced size and mutated body parts. Then he smirks and thrusts his hand forward, doubling the pressure on me in an instant. Not enough. Determined, I hold my ground, refusing to budge. I don't have time to waste with this idiot. Every moment that passes, those swordsmen cut their way through the workers like wheat, getting ever closer to the queen. Where the hell are you, Tiny? At that moment, a thunderous screech blasts the ears of everyone present. The sonic wave so intense it feels like my eardrums have been punched directly. Charging with all of his might, Tiny takes a huge running leap, raising both fists over his head to hammer down on the barrier. The mage facing me pales in fright when he sees this massive ape monster burst out of the trees, leaping towards them in just a few seconds. He screams something in their language, and the second mage, a woman, turns quickly, and the two of them raise their staves in one motion as Tiny descends from above. The pressure on me is released instantly. Infected by my own desperate rage, Tiny's eyes are completely red as his massive body descends, lending all the weight of his mass to his strike. His fists hammer down like meteors, slamming into the defensive barrier with a colossal impact. Boom. Chapter 139, Monster Unleashed. Under the impact of Tiny's mighty fists, the barrier flickers in and out of existence, on the verge of total collapse. The two mages recoil physically from the power of that strike. One of them is even driven to their knees. Still, their eyes are burning with determination, and they keep their staves raised to the sky, apparently reinforcing the barrier with everything they have. To resist that full-bodied strike from Tiny, the shield up there must be incredibly strong. The shield down here near me, however. Infused mandibles. Still desperately constructing the gravity spear within myself, I start to charge my mandibles as well. The strain on my mind is so immense I would have blood flooding out of my nose if I had one. Straining with all of my spirit, I desperately control the mana, directing it into my mandibles whilst leaving as much of the load as possible to the sub-brain. It feels as if both of brains are on fire, cooking themselves with the strain. As the traces of mana flow out of my core and into my mandibles, they begin to emit light, a glow, that grows stronger every moment. My face is already pressed against the barrier, its invisible resistance pushing back against me. My mandibles are spread wide, digging in but not penetrating through the barrier. As the mana flow grows from a trickle to a stream and the light emitted grows more intense, I begin to feel the tiniest bit of give. Yes. With Tiny distracting their attention, they have reinforced the barrier above, but it has grown noticeably weaker below. This is my chance. Straining with every muscle fiber of my face, I push my mandibles to the limit. Break through, damn it. The barrier gives a little more under my assault, then a little more. Seemingly sensing something, the closest mage lowers his head to turn from Tiny to me. Noticing my fiercely glowing mandibles, he tries to redirect his attention to stop me from breaking through, raising his free hand at the last second. Too late. Tearing through the barrier, my mandibles close with a mighty snap. The invisible shield before me cracks and dissolves. The forward pressure I'd created with my legs sends me flying forward, tumbling inside the dome. Snapping one section of the barrier has a visible impact on the mage closest to me, and he wilts under the strain. I don't have much understanding of barrier spells to this point, so I'm sure exactly how this recoil works, but I sure as heck am going to take advantage of it. Snapping to my feet, I use all of my mental power to complete the gravity spear as quickly as possible. Cutting off the flow of mana to my mandibles relieves a lot of the pressure on my mind, and the spell construction continues at a blistering pace. Before the mage closest to me can recover, I dart forward, mandibles wide open. Shattering bite. With all of my strength, I bring my jaws shut upon the mage, I don't even rely on the manifested mandibles but instead ensure I'm close enough that my mandibles crush him directly. Crunch. With a sickening noise, the pulverizing force of my mandibles closes on the mage before he is able to recover. When I release him from my bite, he collapses to the ground and doesn't get up. You have slain level 43 high mage. You have gained experience. You have reached level 11, 1 skill point awarded. You have reached level 12, 1 skill point awarded. The second mage turns in time to see her compatriot fall from my jaws and her face is filled with horror. But she hasn't time to act against me as Tiny has prepared another strike against the shield. She is in a dilemma now, does withdraw her mind from maintaining the shield and attack me, letting Tiny smash it to pieces and robbing the warriors or its defense, or does she leave herself vulnerable to my attack and try and maintain the shield? I expected her to fight to maintain the shield, but instead she decisively brings her staff around towards me, hands weaving patterns in the air as she manipulates the mana around her. Of course, this means Tiny gets a free swing. From the corner of my eye I can see the massive ape rear back with his good hand, rotating his body so far that his back is to the barrier before he unwinds and unleashes his fist as if firing it from a cannon. With a shattering sound like 1,000 panes of glass breaking at once, the invisible dome collapses, diffused shards of mana fall like rain upon us even as they dissolve into nothing, no longer controlled or shaped by any mind. The soldiers pause in their butchery out of shock. Several turn to witness the situation behind them and become aware of my position for the first time. I don't have much time to act. This mage is going to blast me right in the face in 1 second. How is this spear still not ready? Finally the spell hums into life as it finally finishes charging, having been completed construction just a moment ago. I hope I'm in time. Without a thought for my own safety I decisively turn and fire the gravity spear towards the warriors on the front line, desperate to prevent their swords from killing any more of my siblings. Before I even see my spell impact against the warriors, the female mage has completed her spell. Dozens of blades of ice have formed in the air hovering around her. With one wave of her hand, each of the blades blasts towards me with supersonic speed. Holy moly! I can't even dodge if they move at this speed. Before they impact, all I can do is tuck my legs and antennae under my body and tilt my head down in order to protect my eyes, then receive the blow head on. Just before they impact me, something strange tickles my awareness. The ice blades are registering on my heat sense as immensely cold. The temperature of the air around the female mage has dropped precipitously. Now that those blades are screaming through the air towards me, they leave vapor trails of cold behind that is detected by heat sense. With all of this cold in the air, what is that source of heat on my left? There isn't anything there. Before I have time to properly think about it, the ice blades strike home against me. Slash. 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 Immediately intense pain erupts throughout my body as the magical blades slice into my diamond carapace, cutting my flanks, back and directly chopping off one leg plus an antennae. Holy Masarikas Neth Gandalf. That stings like the dickens. My whole body is screaming with pain. Those numerous blades have cut through me all over. My diamond carapace was specially chosen to defend against physical attacks. It is clearly not up to the task against something that is imbued with mana. Activate the regeneration gland. I try to slump forward as if on the verge of death even as the regeneration fluid rapidly spreads through my body, closing over the cuts and repairing my damaged muscles. Thankfully none of those blades was able to penetrate deep enough to damage my core. I can only imagine that significant damage to a monster's core would be completely disastrous if not immediately fatal. Once it has been created, the core is central to a monster's life force, the storage and nerve center of the monster as a magical being. Much like the brain operates as the center of thought, the core is the center of mana, and I'm not confident a monster can live without it once they have adapted to it. Certainly it isn't a theory I want to try out. My ruse seems to have worked. In the heat of the moment, with the barrier destroyed, there are other threats than me that these humans need to deal with. When the mage turns her staff away from me, I push my healing legs underneath myself, ready for my next move. Chapter 140: The Human Menace. I can't afford to let the mage attack Tiny. If she is able to disable him or even heavily wound him with her magic, then we might lose our best chance to deal with those deadly fighters. Not to mention the terrible possibility Tiny might be killed. Quick as a flash I spin around to present my B-zone towards the mage. My sudden energetic and rapid movement takes her completely by surprise, as merely seconds ago I'd been cut to ribbons by her magical barrage. Victory is always decided by the one who thinks the fastest. Receive the famed produce of my commercial district. Pow, pow, pow. At this close range I don't worry about aiming and punch out 3 blasts of acid as rapidly as I can. The jets of acid streak through the air and impact hard against the mage. At this close range the physical force of the acid spray is almost enough to knock her off her feet. She manages to retain her balance by falling to one knee and using her staff to prop herself up, but by then the restrictive nature of the acid is already kicking in, making it difficult for her to move. So long as she is delayed from affecting the rest of the fight, then my purpose will be served. More than taking her out straight away, I'm most concerned with stopping the dreadful slaughter of my siblings. Using their blade skills, the warriors have been able to maintain a distance from the fearless workers, relying on the barrier to keep the ants from pressing forward and giving them the space to unleash their advanced sword skills, slashing out arcs of energy, much like my own shattering bite skill, that carve apart 3 or more workers with every strike. When I see the broken and destroyed remains of my family members littering the ground, my heart twists with pain. These warriors are too good at their work. Most of these workers are already dead, beyond what the Queen's healing can fix. They didn't even have a chance to drag their damaged bodies clear of the fight. Disrupting the warriors from striking at the colony is the #1 priority. Thankfully my gravity spear is starting to take effect. I'd been careful when I constructed the spell to ensure the gravitational field's range was controlled so as not to be too large. So when the target of my spell realizes he has an ethereal purple spear sticking through his guts, his first instinct seems to be to scream in horror, unaware that the true terror is yet to be unleashed. The target itself feels nothing from the spell, no effect at all, but it isn't long until the warriors nearby, most of whom are still facing the ravenous ant tide, begin to notice something is wrong. Inexorably the pulling force of the gravity spear begins to show its effect. The warriors are finding themselves thrown off balance, having to exert force in their feet in order to resist this unknown force. The disruption is so strong that the barrage of sword attacks ceases almost immediately as they try to identify this new threat. To my shock they remain disciplined, quickly barking words and instructions to each other as they resist the building force with all of their might, gradually falling back to the source of the pull without losing their feet. These guys must have some serious physical stats to be able to resist the gravity in this way. They haven't even lost their feet. The calm way they dealt with this new situation worries me immensely. These warriors are so disciplined and powerful they can't be ordinary, not to mention the mage that I killed, not thinking about that too deeply just now, was some ridiculous level over 40. Still they have retreated and grouped up, which is nice of them. Tiny. Smash those guys. After destroying the shield, Tiny has been impatiently waiting for it to completely dissolve before advancing. Now that I've given him a target, he bellows his anger, eyes blazing with wrath as he charges towards the grouped-up warriors. One of the soldiers barks a quick command to the others and steps forward, glittering sword in one hand and imposing tower shield on the other. Clearly he intends to face off against Tiny himself and leave the ants to his fellow soldiers. Glancing quickly at the mage who is yet to rise back to her feet, I decide to gamble and leave her be for the time being so I can intervene and assist Tiny. Skirting to one side, I open up the angle a little and once again unleash my potent range of products from the commercial district. Pow! Pow! 2 rapid-fire shots blast into the warrior, one catching him on the leg whilst the other hits on the side of his chest. Hopefully the restrictive properties and damage are enough to help Tiny batter his way through. With a little momentum behind him, the giant ape lumbers forward and unleashes his devastating fist straight on. The warrior doesn't lose focus for a second, his eyes show no fear or surprise at all, even when my acid splashes against him. Faced with the massive fist of Tiny rushing towards him, he shouts aggressively and steps forward like lightning, rotating his body and smashing his shield into Tiny's arm, deflecting the blow. Holy heck! This guy is insane. He actually managed to defend himself against Tiny. I'd expected we'd be finding parts of him in the next postcode when that fist was unleashed. Clearly my restrictive acid isn't enough to deal with him. Tiny isn't perturbed in the slightest. When his fist failed to destroy the target, he simply wound back his other hand and unleashed a vicious hook. His fist cuts through the air so quickly a shrill whistling sound can be heard ringing in the ears of everyone in the clearing. I can also see the subtle signs of Tiny winding up his electrical engine. Little sparks are beginning to appear on his body and the hair on his arms is beginning to rise. Shockingly, this blow is also deflected but not quite as gracefully. Ducking low, the warrior braces his shield against his shoulder and angles it to deflect the punch, which he manages to do. The shield buckles when that colossal fist smashes into it, but it is successfully deflected, A solid imprint of one of Tiny's knuckles has been left on the pattern metal. The warrior wasn't able to completely deflect the force, however. His whole body is rocked by the impact and it looks as if his bones have been rattled. Nonetheless, he quickly lashes out with his blade, opening a wound on Tiny's chest. I'll have to let these two go at it and hope Tiny can hold his own. The rest of the soldiers are already preparing to unleash their skills upon the onrushing horde of ants. To my dismay, the queen herself has pushed forwards to the front line now, fury blazing in her eyes as she marches over a carpet of her own destroyed offspring in order to attack their killers. Damn it. I really wish she wasn't so damn brave. These guys will cut her apart. Just as I'm preparing to leap forward and unleash my mandibles upon the clustered warriors, I notice another development in the corner of my eye. The female mage has stood up and her entire body is glowing softly with blue light. Looking more carefully, I see that my acid is rapidly dissolving, lifting away from her robes and skin as it fades away into the air. Arg. Now this mage is going to start flinging spells everywhere again. I don't want to get sliced up by that magic again, and I sure as hell don't want to expose the workforce to it. Making a split-second decision, I turn back to face off against the mage and begin weaving a gravity bolt as fast as I can, even as I dash forward to threaten her with my mandibles. She mustn't get a chance to cast a spell. As she sees me charge toward her, the mage's eyes flicker with panic and dart to her side. For some reason, I get the feeling she isn't worried about herself.